Unless do you get your notifications that
11:30 to 1.
the Zoom meeting starts in an hour? That's where you sign it. You don't have to register or anything because you're a
Also, I
panelist.
wish that I had realized that like
Citizens have to register.
I think it's gonna be at the airport, I'm not sure.
Like reading all of the updated social media regulations.
Okay.
Yeah. Consider this scenario that lasts this long. Yeah, very specific. You posted something.
But yeah, as a panelist,
It's like, oh my,
go in there, you click on that.
just don't post. It
Yeah.
doesn't make sense.
That's the safe one.
Better not to post.
you started to put me in my spot with my.
No,
This is what I did.
I was holding this. Perfect, yeah. It's perfect.
Dominus down, are you kidding?
It depends on the,
In my spot with my chair, so I
it's
could
like a
just.
certain percentage.
You're just gonna make fun of my tablet, right?
Group that actually applies to.
Yeah, it's tiny.
Usually if it's like a citywide thing, it's like,
It's tiny.
Free tablet.
It's tiny, but you can see better. It's tiny. Well, it's actually not, I can't.
hey everybody, I have 6 o'clock. Should we get started?
Yes.
First thing we have is South Arkansas River Restoration Project update. And who would like to step up to start that presentation? Or just everybody at the same time could do that as well.
Hi, everybody. My name is Chris Lamson. I'm with the Collegiate Peaks chapter of Trout Unlimited. And then with me helping out is Nathan Ward here with the Upper Arkansas Watershed Partnership. And we are co-leads on this the South Arkansas River Restoration Project. So we recently received our 60% designs for this, and so we wanted to kind of give an introduction to those of you who weren't familiar with it, and then an update to anybody who was familiar with what we were doing here. So this is a project we've been working on in conceptual level for over a decade. And over the course of that time, we've had a number of stream assessments done. This image is from one of those, which is a stream health assessment done by Ecometrics. And we're mostly going to be talking today about the Vanderveer property that the city owns, but our reach is 1.2 miles from County Road 107 all the way to the confluence on the South Arkansas. In this image, the kind of green area with the grade of C is the segment that includes the Vanderveer property. And so a C grade is not great, and there's a lot of potential to improve the habitat quality and diversity all the way through the whole reach. So, go to the next one. And so this is a project we've been working with a lot of different collaborators and stakeholders. It's the Upper Arkansas Watershed Partnership, which is 5 conservation groups, local conservation groups. Collegiate Peaks, Trout Unlimited, and Central Colorado Conservancy are kind of the main 2 of the 5 working on this, but then we have a lot of different stakeholders who've been engaging, including the city. And I want to point out that Bill Almquist and David Lady and Diesel Post have all been tremendous help to us, extremely cooperative and engaging, and so we're really thankful to all 3 of them and their staff for helping and working with us on this project. So as I mentioned, our overall project is the 1.2 miles from County Road 107, which is where Brady's Nursery is, downstream to the confluence. And there's a number of different landowners in there, including the city that owns the Vanderveer property. And so there are a number of issues with the river from both hydraulic and habitat points of view. These images are both taken from the footbridge over the South Ark behind the Hampton Inn. The image on the left is looking upstream, and the city owns a narrow strip along what on here is the right-hand side bank, where you can see that there's a big cobble berm, and there's one on both sides of the river. And in this area, those cobble berms are basically hemming the river in and disconnecting them from the river from its floodplain. And so in this area, the solution would be to basically to breach those berms or remove them altogether and reconnect the river with its floodplain. And then on the image on the right is looking downstream into the Vanderveer property. And in this area, we don't have the issue with the berms, but what we have is a wide, flat, straight river. And so it's overly wide, basically because there's less water coming down now because of agricultural diversions than there was historically. So the river is wider than it needs to be for the amount of water that's flowing now. It's also a very flat, uniform bottom, which is just there's a lack of habitat diversity in terms of like for a quality fishery. And then you can see that it's overly straightened. And that's, again, like the other two, is pretty common. Historically, the river has been straightened. And, and then the third kind of major issue that we have is that footbridge itself, and which is too narrow for the hydrologic conditions we have. At high water and flood waters, it becomes a choke point. Those abutments are too close together, and so it bottlenecks the river. And that causes issues with sediment transport. So the natural transport of sediment gets interrupted, it slows down, it drops sediment above the river, and then as it flows through, it starts eroding because it doesn't have a good sediment balance. So it's a grading above the river and then, or above the bridge and eroding below the bridge. So go ahead. And so we have a number of solutions we've come up with. This is one of the images from our 60% design. You can see the footbridge there is at the left side. Upstream of that footbridge, as I mentioned, we would either remove or breach those berms to reconnect the floodplain. And then down here, there's a number of things we want to do. Those dotted blue lines on either side of the bridge are culverts that we would put in potentially. This is one option. Another option would be to replace the bridge with another bridge with a larger span. This is another option, which would be to install culverts, which would convey those high water flows and alleviate that bottleneck and hopefully help to fix that sediment transport issue that's causing basically kind of cascades all the way downstream. The light blue blobs you see on there represent habitat and constriction pools. So those are areas where we would excavate a deeper area in the river bottom, and that would provide deeper areas for habitat, would provide for fish refuge both from velocity and from predators, and also importantly would provide overwintering habitat. In the wintertime, fish tend to pod up in the slower moving deeper waters, and we don't have those here, so we don't have great overwintering habitat. So hopefully providing habitat like that would allow us to have more of a resident fish population in this area, which we don't have currently. Another couple of things we would do here is you can see on the very top screen, you can see kind of the edges of cars there. That's the back of the Pharisee Boys property. And if you've ever been down there, that's a very, very steep embankment. And you can see that it's on an outside bend where the river is kind of tending to undercut that bank. So that's a real issue, but also a potentially extremely expensive one to fix if we wanted to get in and tear into that whole bank. So what we would propose to do there is to add some boulders along the toe of that bank just to take that shear force that's undercutting that bank away and kind of stabilize it. And then those kind of U-shaped things there are boulder riffles. And those would be constructions primarily to really stabilize things for the Boots and Hinton ditch. There's a little bit of a kind of a light blue dashed line that goes off there, and that's the Boots and Hinton ditch. And their diversion is right there. So we need to make sure that the geometry of the river for that diversion is stable. And so that's kind of what we would be looking at in this area. And this is a piece that we're currently, actually today, just put in a grant application to move forward from this 60% design up to 100% design. We're going to be doing that essentially from those boulder riffles upstream to the left on your screen all the way up. And then if you want to go to the next one. And so then the next couple here, that's just sort of an illustration of what those pools would look like. So we would excavate, and then the other piece of that puzzle is we would take the excavated material, put it on the other side of the channel to basically narrow the channel down. And in this way, we make the channel a little more appropriate width, and which has a lot of other implications. And by doing that, kind of on alternating sides, we can introduce a little bit of sinuosity back into that overly straight channel, and without being too disruptive and trying to completely rebuild the channel, we can do that in a way that's less disruptive, but gives us a little more of that functionality of a natural river. Okay. And then this is an image, an example of what those riffles would look like, those boulder riffles. So there are subsurface. We try to make them look as natural as possible. So, go ahead. And then this is an example of what that boulder toe protection along, like underneath the Pharisee Boys, might look like. So it wouldn't be a big boulder retaining wall. It'd be, just either subsurface and potentially a little bit above, just enough to protect it from undercutting. And so further downstream, we have another issue that's similar.
Do you mind if we ask questions along the way, or will that mess up your flow?
Sure,
Not
sure,
a
yeah.
ton.
Yeah, I know we had a limited amount of time, and
Okay.
so I wanted to roll through, but please, let's do that.
We can have puns, it's a work
Yeah.
session.
I was just thinking about the cottonwood trees. So I've never heard of that part, obviously the boulders and the riffles. So if you're taking those cottonwood trees and putting them in there, do they wash away over time? Does it deteriorate over time? Do they flow downstream with high water? Do you understand kind of what?
Yeah, that's a great question. No, they would be essentially anchored in, buried in. They would only be partially exposed.
Okay.
I mean, with a extreme flood example, that would be it's possible that it could wash out. But the other piece of that is that large wood in rivers is a really natural thing, and it's something that over the course of 100 years of river work, we spent decades and decades tearing big, large woody debris out of rivers. Now we're spending lots and lots of time and energy putting it all back because we realize it's vital for habitat and things like that. So yeah, they're typically stable. There's a property up north of town, Fred Klein's property. There's a couple of different cottonwood log installations that were done there more than a decade ago, and they're still in there and looking great.
Okay.
So done properly, they're very stable, and those are typically they're anchored in pretty deeply. Like if you have a 30-foot log, 20 feet of it might be buried to make sure that it doesn't go away. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
All right.
And so this is further downstream. There's an area where the river comes down and it makes a hard right angle turn. And you can see that there's a big pile of slash debris there. And we think that the river at one point went straight, but now it takes a hard right turn. And we kind of have the same situation as the bridge, where when it makes that right turn, it loses all its velocity and its energy, and it drops all of its sediment. And then as it heads down to the right off the screen there, downstream, it picks up speed and it starts eroding again. And here you can see, this is just downstream of that area. These two photos were taken about 1.5 years apart, and you can see that there's a lot of erosion going on there, which is normal and natural. It's a natural river process in response to what's happening upstream. You can see in these two pictures that on the right-hand side, the river channel is about twice as wide as it is on the left. And in an ideal world, we would just kind of let this do its thing. Erosion isn't a bad thing, it's a natural process. The only issue is that the city has plans to build recreational fields just to the south of here. And so, unfortunately, in this situation, we have to come up with a solution that's a little more predictable and stable and isn't going to jeopardize that infrastructure after it gets built. And so this is one option. This is one that was included in our 60% design, which is the area in grayed out would be a new channel where we would actually completely realign the river back north, close to where that historic channel was, before it took that right angle turn. And then the kind of brownish area is the current channel. And so that we would end up taking the material that was excavated to make the new channel and use it to partially fill in the existing channel. The new channel would be more narrow to kind of make it more appropriate to the width it should be. So the old channel would remain depressed. It wouldn't be completely filled into grade, and it would remain as an overflow channel. And so that would be important for flood control. And to make sure that with that narrower channel, we were still able to convey flood and high water events without raising the base flood elevation. That has a lot of implications for like FEMA mapping and things like that we want to avoid doing. And so this is one option. This is a very heavily engineered option. And so there's a lot of differing opinions on whether this is a good way to go or not. And there's also a lot of complexity with doing something like this in terms of modeling, as I said, flood concerns, really fully understanding it. So this piece of the Vanderveer property, and this would extend off of the Vanderveer also onto the Snyder's property downstream. This isn't going to be a part of the 100% design that we're applying for now, but this is going to become kind of a separate project where the next step is going to be a lot more exhaustive hydraulic and hydrologic modeling. So we can really look at any like worst case scenarios with floods to really understand what might happen and how it might impact any other infrastructure that the city's going to build on the property, and also how it might affect downstream property owners. We've got the US 50 highway bridge right there, so CDOT gets real nervous anytime you start proposing things. They want to really understand what's going to happen. We also there's a lot of people who are interested in seeing a much more natural and dynamic system installed here. So we're going to probably look at different alternatives that aren't quite as engineered as this one, but that can give us the same sort of effect of protecting infrastructure while maximizing the amount of natural river processes that are allowed to happen through here. And so this just gives a little more example of some of the other structures that might be involved in doing that realignment in terms of stabilizing outside banks, creating riffles and habitat diversity like we did upstream. But again, this is all probably going to look a lot different in the 100% design for that piece. And so just for context, this is the latest concept for the fields, the multi-use fields. And so at the upper right, you can see the kind of the sine wave of the new proposed channel in our design, and then the old channel. So it just kind of gives you an idea of how close the existing channel is to what the city is hoping to put in there. So that's why we're trying to work very closely with them to make sure that everybody understands what's happening and everybody's in agreement that it's all going to work together. I mean, our goal ultimately is to maximize the health of the river, and the city's goal is to maximize use of land for all the citizens. So we want to come up with something that meets everybody's goals. And so Nathan is going to talk a little bit about a parallel piece of this project, which is creating a trail system.
Hi, welcome, new people. Congratulations. So this is a picture of the existing trail taken from just by the bridge. If you look to the left, you can see it's heavily used down in there. I'm sure you've all been down in there at some point, used by hundreds of people a day. The existing trail runs right along the river. It's, compacting the soil. It's basically, all the vegetation in the trail area is killed. And then in high water, this area is completely covered, which is how it's supposed to be, as the floodplain comes over the bank here and covers this. So we've been working with a program from the National Park Service called the Rivers, Trails, and Conservation Assistance Program. And part of the services they offer is, how do you plan areas like this for urban areas, basically. And the part they've worked on the most is trail design. Can you advance the slide? So the first part of this is north of the river. So that parking lot is the Hampton Inn. And then to the left of that is the Southwest Conservation Corps property. So we've been talking to them about putting in a small environmental education trail around this wetland area. And it involves 3 landowners, the Lodgeco Hospitality Group, which is out of Michigan, which owns the Hampton Inn, Southwest Conservation Corps, and then the city of Salida owns the little stretch right along the river. So this is a project that we could start on very soon. I've been working with all these groups to try to figure out, who would hold the trail easement. Can the city of Salida hold it? Whose insurance will cover it? hopefully the city of Salida. And once we get those in place, I think we can start this. And this is not part of the next planning phase, really. You know, we're hoping this to be a sort of community-driven trail effort with interpretive signage, and hopefully in partnership with Southwest Conservation Corps, Salida Parks Open Space and Trails Spot. And I always think it's supposed, but it's really it's Spot. Yeah, and with UAWP and the other landowners through here. So this is one little trail option. Can you advance the slide? And here is another one. It's a little bit hard to see exactly. We're looking at, so the landscape designer that works for the National Park Service came up with this trail location by looking at the 5-year floodplain and then kind of charting a path through the driest section of that 5-year floodplain. And what it would be, it moved the trail back quite a ways from where it is now. It wouldn't be, you know, right along the riverbank. It would have different access points coming down to the river so that people can still access the river. These little T shapes. The purple shape would possibly be a boardwalk, depending on budget, and then the dotted line would be gravel fines. And then one part that's not shown on this particular design is if the river is resituated to the north, then the Salida Recs Department has requested some other access points to come in, sort of in this area here. So we hope to keep working with the MPS program. I would say that all federal programs are tenuous at best right now, but they are still in existence, and we're going to continue working with them as long as possible. Are there any questions on this trail?
Could you quickly point out where the Snyder property is?
Yes. So if you look here, this is the Snyder property.
Okay.
So they have 8 acres right there. And the city did a land swap with the Snyders.
Yeah.
You can carry that with
Yeah,
you.
you could just have it. Yeah.
So the city, a few years back, did a land swap with the Snyders to sort of work out a better arrangement for everyone there. So we've been working with them pretty closely. There's a new diversion going in on the South Arc right now by the Triview Metropolitan Group, which is the water group for Monument, Colorado, which is where part of the South Arc is now being pumped up and not used locally. So they're putting in a diversion there, and we've talked with them quite a bit to make sure their diversion incorporates fish passage. One of the goals of this project is not just to create habitat, but to create better fish and wildlife habitat through the entire reach. And there's been a couple of impediments to that. One is a concrete weir, which is basically a small low-head dam, which is right at the confluence of the South Arc and the Arkansas. It's only about 3 feet high, but what that does is it blocks most fish passage from the Arkansas River into the South Arc. Colorado Parks and Wildlife has expressed great interest in removing that, and it is actually slated to be removed as part of the County Road 105 bridge replacement project, which David Lady is working on, and that project is currently out to bid. How fast that moves forward, David would probably have to tell you, but we're hoping to replace both of those at one time. If the bridge costs come in too high, then we would probably approach you guys and ask to remove the weir as a sort of a separate mini project. That little project is permitted through the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers already, and there's money in the budget for it in 2026. And so then we worked with this diversion to make sure the fish passage is possible through this new diversion being installed as we speak. And what else? Next question. This kind of shows the 5-year floodplain and where the trail was situated in relationship to that. Okay, do you want to talk about this part? Sure. Okay.
So yeah, as you see, there's a lot that's going to happen before any big yellow machines touch the river. A big one is continued outreach. We've got, so we're working, in addition to the piece on the Vanderveer property, we're working in Two Rivers. That whole area has similar habitat structure work as the area on the upstream part of Vanderveer. So we've got 21 individual landowners that have waterfront down there. So there's going to be lots and lots of meetings to be done there, as well as with the city staff and with you all as needed as we move forward. As I said, we've got one grant application out for Colorado Water Conservation Board to take us to 100% design. And then we're working on another one with Colorado Parks and Wildlife for matching funds for that grant. And so that's kind of where we're at right now. Then we'll go through a round of permitting. Then we'll go through another round of fundraising for the $1 to $2 million it'll take to do all the work. And then trail construction is separate from that. So there's a lot to happen, but we're excited to be continuing to move forward with it. So
The design looks great. Thanks for all the hard work here. Is there a financial ask from the city? Obviously, we would support this, but it's just trying to understand if there's a financial ask.
yeah, great question. At this time, no.
Okay.
We're
thank you.
hoping, for this round, we're hoping to do it all entirely with grants, and that's our goal moving forward. So, but at some point, especially during the construction part, there may be a requirement for that for a lot of grant programs. It would need to be the city would need to be the ones match or would need to be the fiscal sponsor. So, at this time, we're able to do it from a private point of view.
Okay.
Any other?
I have a question. So you were describing some of the challenges at the very beginning with the photos. And it sounds to me, if I'm interpreting this correctly, that some of those challenges are caused by previous engineering of the river. Is that an accurate assessment?
Yeah, some of it is.
Okay.
It's a combination of the river being intentionally relocated and straightened over time. A rancher would prefer to have a river on the side of their property rather than down the middle of a pasture, so it's not uncommon for them to be moved. It's overly wide just because there's less water coming down because of upstream diversions than there was as when the channel was forming,
So you mentioned that there are some people who would want a less engineered solution. Do you have some concept of what that would be, or is that something that you're hoping to shift to if it comes to that?
Yeah, ideally, a river is a dynamic system. Rivers move around. The South Arkansas historically has been, from Methodist Mountain up to the north end of town, and this whole area that we're talking about is really the delta. So it typically would have a braided channel throughout, not just a single channel, it would be multiple channels, and they would be eroding and depositing and moving around all the time. And so as much as it's possible, we would love to see a system like that. The South Arkansas, really from the headwaters all the way down, is highly altered and really hemmed in. In a lot of areas, it's riprap all the way through. It can't move an inch. And so it's not great from a ecological point of view. And it's also, when you have a single channel like that, you have a lot more flood risk. A braided channel is a lot better at dissipating flood forces. And so when you have a single channel, especially if it's armored, that just pushes all that energy downstream, and the next person downstream has to, is the one at risk. And so the more you can kind of spread that out and let it do its thing, the better. So we'd love to see something like that as much as we could. We recognize that there's limited ability to do that based on the other needs that are planned for this property. But yeah, that's our goal, is to try to make it as natural and dynamic as we can.
Thank you.
I have a question that might be more applicable to Bill Almquist, and I'm curious if any of this reworking of the river will have any impacts on the riparian setbacks. And now that I say that, I think actually, because I'm thinking about past the past Highway 50, I think that is excluded from,
That is correct.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
so
never
everything
mind.
on that side, Highway 50, is excluded from those setbacks.
okay.
Yep. You answered your own question.
I, look at that.
Nice. Any other? I did just have one as far as it comes to that stream health. This project affecting downstream. You had mentioned how it could pertain to downstream properties, but also as far as like, do we have any way of gauging how the stream health of those segments, the Lowry Street segment, the Two Rivers segment, will be affected by this work? Considering it's already at like a D, will like we brought to a D minus or something, or
No, I mean, hopefully it's gonna go up. That's the expectation. In addition, I didn't really mention this, but in addition to the in-stream habitat work, we'll also be doing quite a bit of riparian planting. Riparian zone is the stream side vegetation zone, which can extend quite a ways from the river. And in the case of the South Arkansas, especially right by that footbridge, it's naturally would be several hundred feet wide. And so, and that's another issue, is a lot of that riparian zone is gone. And so we would be doing extensive planting of riparian vegetation, which has a lot of benefits to the river and also to flooding. That's it stabilizes the banks, but more importantly than that, it adds a tremendous amount of roughness. So as floodwaters are trying to flow through willows, they're dispersing a ton of energy, and so that really is a great way of one of the major ways that floodplains dissipate flood energy. So doing that kind of thing, and then we'll be doing the same in Two Rivers itself.
Oh.
Yeah. That's a major part of what we're going to be doing in Two Rivers is trying to plant as much additional riparian vegetation as we can, especially on the south bank where there's a little more ability to do that.
Would you be doing that in spring? Is that the right time to do the plantings?
I think so, but yeah, whenever we get there. I mean, we're a couple of years out realistically from being there, between design, permitting, fundraising, and so on. But yeah, it would all be timed. So most of the time, in-stream work is done in the wintertime when flows are low, and then you would do planting in the spring. Yeah. Yeah, I'm not an expert on that, but yeah,
It's a very exciting project.
Yeah. And keep us posted on any volunteer opportunities. I have a Rolodex of people that would love to be involved. So.
Awesome, that's great. I mean, that's another big thing that we want to do with this, is use it as a way to hopefully engage the community and get the community invested. If people go out and plant 1,000 willows in a day, they hopefully will be, eager to protect that resource in the future. So yeah, that'd be great. We'd love help with that.
Sorry, before you go, I do have a request. So for the footbridge, the work that will be done on there. So a lot of like families with kiddos and people getting to work do use that pedestrian access to get into town instead of getting onto 50. So if we could make sure, maybe us as a city or you guys as a business, just make sure that we have like signage, or just we communicate to the constituents that footbridge is going to be closed. And if we could do it at a different time as the 105 bridge, that way we're not cutting off pretty much like half of Ward 3 that doesn't want to get onto Highway 50 in order to commute to work via pedestrian or a bike.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I don't know that we'll be replacing the bridge. When we do our work, it would be most likely, there would be some temporary closures short term as we excavated to install culverts, if that's the solution we ended up doing. But yeah, we absolutely would figure out some sort of a traffic management to help with that. That's a great point. So yeah, we'll keep that in mind for sure.
Thank you.
I should mention, you had something else to
yeah.
go ahead.
I just wanted to add one little part to that. David Lady reminded me they are going to start utility installation soon, so that will come down that corridor to the bridge. So I don't imagine it'll be open. I think that work starts next month.
Okay, great.
And then the utility line sort of loops around and it'll cut through another part of I think it's kind of behind the storage unit place. Is that right? So it'll loop around, you know, between Pharisee Boys and the Hampton Inn, down by the bridge, a big loop, and then back through the easement through the storage unit place. And that work will start next month. So people will start seeing, you know, excavators through this really pretty area that David will fix. Maybe.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you guys for the work that you guys are doing. Like I say, it's very exciting, and thanks for coming in and educating us about it. So the only real big issue that I really had in the whole process was the diversion of the river to its, you know, to the new course that you guys were looking to move that river to. But it sounds like you guys have, you know, looked into every, you know, aspect of it and crossed all your T's, and you guys are well aware of, you know, of everything that entails. So all my kind of questions were pretty much answered.
Yeah,
from you
I mean,
guys.
there's a lot more work to do on that piece of the project for sure, but we're going to be doing a lot more T crossing over the course of time to make sure that we have the best possible solution for that area.
Thank you guys, I
Yeah.
appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Nathan. All right, up next, we have Williams Ranch Conservation Easement.
Yeah, keeping on the theme of environment and conservation, the Central Colorado Conservancy has come to the city, asking for a letter of support for the potential conservation, permanent conservation of the Williams Ranch property, which, like the South Ark River area there, you all should be fairly aware of if you've walked along the Monarch Spur Trail at all. It's pretty centrally located within the city, and obviously affords some pretty iconic views from that stretch of the Monarch Spur Trail. I just actually got the numbers from Diesel. There's approximately 100,000 uses of that stretch of the Monarch Spur Trail every year, which I knew was well used. I didn't realize it was quite that high. But they are looking for a letter of support in order to advance acquisition funding for the conservation easement of this 37-acre property. It's been interesting. We've been aware of this particular process as the Conservancy has been doing its due diligence around it over the last few years. And, there have been some questions that we've been asking to better understand, the value of this to the community. And I just wanted to point out, there's been folks who have asked questions around the potential developability of this property for affordable housing, for instance, and which is a very legitimate question. An important thing to point out is that this entire property is actually within the National Wetlands Inventory and is listed on the Colorado Natural Heritage map system as a wetland. If you ever see it, if you're ever out there in, say, May, June, even portions of July, you'll notice that a good portion of it is underwater, which translates to the fact that in order to develop it would cost a lot of money to either mitigate those wetlands or to fill it for the purpose of housing, which pretty much undermines all the potential for affordability out there. So just an important note. Could you scroll down, just show a couple of the photos in there? So, like I said, pretty iconic views of the Collegiate Peaks from that stretch of the Spur Trail, which if they were to be developed, given setbacks on that property under the current R2 zoning, could actually go away for, the public that uses that portion of the trail. Interesting to note that the 2023 future land use map does show it designated for agricultural reserve, allowing for that permanent agricultural use down the line if the landowner so chooses. I'll note that This letter of support isn't absolutely necessary for them to move forward with the conservation easement. It's the decision of the Colorado Water Conservation Board. Obviously, it would not hurt in their argument to try to get this permanently conserved. The other thing I wanted to show real quick, Christy, if you could pull it up just to show that map. This is off of the National Wetlands Inventory in Colorado National Heritage. It's circled in red. It's by far the largest piece of wetlands within city limits outside of that which we were just speaking of out at Vanderveer. So pretty good opportunity to be able to conserve some valuable naturally valued property that obviously has agricultural use right now. And so I've got Bryce Howell here from the Conservancy, if you all have any questions for him on specifics around it. But otherwise, they are looking to have a letter signed this evening because the CWCB has agreed to keep their application open until midnight for them to be able to get this in, if you so choose. With that, I can take any questions you might have.
Where do I sign?
That'd be Justin signing, but it's right there.
We can all hold the giant pen at the same time. Any burning questions or, yeah?
So if you look on page 2 of the small packet there, is the other property up the Monarch Spur Trail also wetlands?
Yes.
The piece right past that.
Yeah, on the other side of Holman?
Yes, sir.
Yes, it is. It's also considered wetlands. That is outside of city limits currently. It's in the county.
Oh, okay.
But it is shown as wetlands on the inventory map.
Okay, and the other side, past Trailside also?
Yes, south of the spur trail is also shown as wetlands.
Is that in the city limits?
That is not.
No, because
That's
that
also in
spur
the
trail
county.
goes out of the city limits.
Yeah, basically, if you look at the future land use map, everything in the yellow or orange there is in city limits all the way out to Walmart. So you can see the dashed black and white line.
Right.
That follows everything that's west of Holman there in the green is.
It's all
in the county.
wetlands.
Yeah, right there it is.
Okay. Good to know, thank you.
Any other questions?
Well, we always say we can't buy the view, but it seems like in this case, we are kind of, so yeah, I'm all about the letter of support.
Hoping to buy it anyways.
Yeah, and just very excited that we have the opportunity to protect this.
Yeah. Does, just off the cuff, does the letter have to state that it provides a habitat for bear? I mean, people aren't like a huge fan of bear in the city.
Want us to change it to deer?
I mean, like, well, deer's already, the birds and the deer are already there, and like, those are inevitable, but bear, though.
Yeah, I'd be happy to have it referred to wildlife in general, if that makes more
Yeah.
sense to you guys. It is a really critical wildlife refuge for deer, migratory birds, geese, all that good stuff, and bear, and mountain lions, just to put that
Oh,
out there
God.
as well.
This is a public
We
meeting.
can definitely do whatever you want.
Yeah, just because that, if there is like a bear roaming around, I get a lot of calls about that. Like a lot of like, what are we doing?
We can change it up.
Okay, cool. Yeah, just keep it general.
As someone who has often had to submit grant applications at the very last minute, I would like to extend some grace to you and, understanding about what that's all about while you're waiting for the letter of support. So just wanted to say, I've been there and, yeah, I know what that's like.
Yeah, we can really appreciate it. This is, we've gotten a lot of support from the Chaffey County BOCC, a lot of other organizations. So we're really throwing everything at this application because it's a very critical time for nonprofits to be putting funds out there. Funds are very limited. And so every little piece really helps to make every application more critical. So thanks again so much for having us here.
Yeah. And again, if the bear thing takes too long, I mean, we're here about expediting your efforts, I don't want to put a monkey wrench in anything. I'll sign it. I'll sign what you want.
Should be pretty quick.
And good luck.
Awesome.
Indeed.
All right,
Thank you
we'll
so
do
much.
that. We'll have it ready for you, Mayor, shortly.
Thank you. Okay, and then up next, we have council training.
Yes.
I'm late.
I will just tee this up. So Sam Light is the Deputy Director of CIRSA, the Colorado Intergovernmental Risk Sharing Agency, and I did not have to look at the screen to say that, right? I have the privilege of actually being on the board because, municipal insurance.
So fun.
I mean,
Of course you love it.
It
Gets me
is.
pumped.
It's very, it scratches an itch. So, Sam,
Or you're gonna be into this.
Sam's a great resource for you as elected officials, for those of us who serve you as staff members. And I always think that it helps for you to hear other people's voices instead of just staff. So thank you for coming, Sam. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor and Council. Thank you, Christy, for that introduction. Thank you all for having me out this evening. So, as mentioned, I'm the Deputy Executive Director and General Counsel for CIRSA. Thank you for unloading the entire name. That's kind of long. That's a few. It's kind of a few, which is why we call it CIRSA. So, for a little more background, we're your insurance provider for property and casualty insurance coverage. Let's go to the next slide. And so we provide, the things that immediately come to mind when you think of insurance. We provide the insurance, for example, for your buildings, this building, for property damage coverage, and then, all of your vehicles and equipment, we cover those for auto physical damage and auto liability, right? And then we provide probably what I would call more esoteric coverages of interest to public entities, right? Public entity liability coverage covers everything from, let's see. We talked about a recreation trail. Maybe somebody slips and falls on a recreation trail and thinks that you created some dangerous condition, right? And thinks that their injury was your fault. Those are the types of claims that we cover on your behalf. We cover police liability claims involving law enforcement activities. And perhaps of interest to you all, we provide public officials liability coverage. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about what that means to you and what protections are in place for you. There is at the back of the presentation a further breakdown of the coverages that we provide on behalf of our members. So you can check those out, but a little bit more about CIRSA as an entity. So we're not a commercial insurance company. We are not a for-profit corporation. Instead, we are a public entity self-insurance pool, which is a long phrase in and of itself as well, right? So we were formed back in 1982 when there was an insurance crisis, not only in Colorado, but around the country for public entities because of the tort liability crisis going on at that time involving public entities. It wasn't only that you couldn't, afford insurance, you couldn't find public entity insurance. So one of the solutions at that point was that state legislatures around the country, including here in Colorado, passed legislation that enabled public entities to essentially pool their resources, their funds, right, and create a self-insurance vehicle to provide their own insurance coverages and their own risk management resources. And so that's what we do at CIRSA. It's kind of a small and tiny operation at that time. We were formed by 18 municipalities at that time, and our current membership now stands at 295 members. So to give you a sense of what that number is composed of, we currently insure 90% of the cities and towns in the state of Colorado. So that's almost all the small to mid-size, almost all the mid to large, but not the really, really big ones. There's a couple of entities, frankly, that are probably too big for pooling. Think of the Denvers of the world, right? And those kinds of entities, they tend to self-insure themselves as an entity anyway, and probably within a pooling structure, something as large as a Denver would be a kind of a tail wagging the dog type of thing. We also insure what we call affiliated entities, which are things like housing authorities, urban renewal authorities, regional transportation authorities, emergency 911 telephone service, regional fire authorities. As long as those affiliated entities have a connection with a municipality, right, then they're potentially eligible for membership in CIRSA, okay? We are a member-owned, member-governed organization without a profit motive. Our only two interests are the interest of the members of the pool individually and the interest of the pool as a whole. Our board is made up of member representatives from around the state. Very proud to have Christy as a member of our board. And we have a geographic diversity of board membership as well. It's important to our board. They actually have it embedded in their board policies that they seek out geographic representation throughout the state to make sure that the members, because we have a pretty interesting state here in Colorado. We got everything from mountain communities to the eastern plains to urbanized areas. It's important to have representation on our board among those different interests, right? So we have a wonderful board that helps resource our organization to help serve our members. So you can learn more about us at www.sursa.org, but another place to go is one of the handouts. I got a couple of handouts that I'm going to mention throughout the presentation, but one of them is what we call Sursa at a Glance, which is on the top of the stack of materials there. We're in a pooling construct, unlike commercial insurance, right? We think that proactive risk management is a very important aspect of what we and our members do, right? What our members do individually and what we do collectively, right? Because if you think about that, here in Salida, right, you're working as the governing body to be good stewards of interest and assets and to appropriately resource the entity to proactively manage risk, right? And so we do that collectively on behalf of the pool, and we think that proactive risk management is a win-win for everybody. Our claims director and claims manager says that the best claim is the claim that didn't happen, right? But part of being good stewards of assets, we think in a pooling concept, right, is whatever that looks like to you is using those risk management resources, right, to help you manage risk effectively and most importantly, to get good things done on behalf of your community. Sursa is not there to say, that's uninsurable, don't do it, right? We're there to say, how can we find a way to help you manage this risk, right? And staff, some of the staff members, maybe some of you are familiar with our risk control team. I dare say we have the preeminent public entity risk management consulting department in the state. They just happen to be all Sursa employees, right? And so they're there as a resource to help if you're, designing a new playground facility and you want to have our folks come out and inspect it, they can take a look at it and give you suggestions. They actually, perhaps to the chagrin of staff once in a while, but they show up every year for the annual safety audit as well, right? And so that's a great thing, a wonderful opportunity to visit with our members, right, and sort of work together collaboratively to identify areas that might need some attention or some resources, but also to make sure that you're given kudos, because we do have an audit score system, right, where the audit score then translates into potential dollars that can be used to offset the cost of your insurance, okay? So the at-a-glance resource helps you understand sort of by function the kind of resources that we provide around risk management for our members. And we truly believe that effective risk management is a goal throughout the organization, but it also starts at the very top of the organization, right? At the governing body level in proper understanding of what the risks are that you face as a public entity, right? Adequately resourcing your organization. What's that document that your favorite document, perhaps? That annual budget, right? Right? Have we looked at, the risk exposures that we have? Are we adequately resourcing, right, those risk exposures from everything to, maintenance of the city's trails, sidewalks to, things that keep our police officers safe, right? So that's an important part of the work you do as well. So, but with respect to my presentation, there's also risk exposure for the governing body and its members, all right? That we're going to talk more about in a minute. So my presentation is a chance for us to exercise that muscle that maybe we don't exercise all the time, but to think about the risk management issues that we face as elected officials individually and collectively. So it's entitled Ethics, Liability, and Best Practices for you all as elected officials. I've got a couple of handouts that I'll mention as we go through the material. Let's go to the next slide. What I'm going to talk about is suggestions for best practices, right, that I hope will help you succeed both individually and collectively as elected officials, right? And I think if we commit to the suggestions, then I think by and large risk management issues and liability exposures tend to kind of take care of themselves, right? So I know we had an election recently at CIRSA. You know, this service that we provide for trainings is something, I do this for elected officials and appointed officials. For example, if you would like us to come back and present to your planning commission, we can do that. It's at no additional expense to the member, but we have trainings at all levels throughout your organization. So, but my training is focused on governing body risks and suggestions around that. So we're going to talk about the role of public official, transparency, organizational and structure and liability, the idea about how everyone has a job description, ethics and personal conduct, and then due process. We try to get out and visit our members about once every 2 years, and when you have election. We got a couple of new members on council, is that right? Congratulations. Who are those folks? Congratulations. All right, and a couple of veterans, a couple of years under our belt. Who's in that 2 to 4 year range? Anybody in the 4 to 8? Anybody with 34 years or more? That's my record. Okay, all right. So
Pretty close.
you might wonder how that came to be with term limits, but we'll save that for another day. Just a caveat, though I am an attorney, I have 2 disclaimers. This, of course, is not an attorney-client discussion, okay? And then second, as I do my presentations, please feel free to ask questions as I go through the material. I want to make our time together as useful to you all as possible. So if you have questions, please feel free to interrupt me and we can talk about your question. But my caveat in that regard is I do have a pretty good radar for what I call the live one, right? You know, sometimes I'll be doing the training and someone will say, yeah, Sam, I've got a question. What if another member of the town board does this? And everyone's eyes open wide. And I said, wow, this is going to be exciting, you know, because this sounds like something that's going on in the here and now in the city, right? And if that's, my radar's going off for me suggesting that, you know, I can still probably give you a couple of suggestions from CIRSA's risk management standpoint, but if you need legal advice in the here and now, that's for your attorney team, which I think is Williams and Wilson. Mm-hmm. I always want to say W&W because I always I get those names. William, so it's a great team. I've worked with them for many years. You're in good hands with those folks. And from the governing body perspective, if you think about this, you know, we're elected to serve as a citizen, part-time, essentially a volunteer policymaker and legislator. And but there are a lot of complex issues that get thrown at us, right? Mm-hmm. So if one of those complex issues is you need legal advice on, then rely on the W&W team. The same disclaimer, maybe it's not a legal issue, but my radar is going off telling me that's really something that's in the wheelhouse of your city administrator, right? As your chief executive officer, essentially, right? Municipal corporations are corporations. And by analogy, it's kind of like you're the board of directors and your city administrator is your CEO. We just have different titles for that, right? So if I sense that's what's going on, again, I may have some thoughts for you, but you want to rely upon your staff, which leads me to one of my preeminent risk management suggestions in view of how I just described your role, right? Use those resources, right, effectively to help you get work done as a council, right? To help you look good while doing it and to help keep you out of harm's way, right? Because they're a resource and they, you know, if you've got a question, you want to give them some grace if you call individually with your question, right? And it sounds like to your administrator or attorney, oh, that's something that the whole council needs to know about, right? And in fact, I even think it says something in your council handbook about that, about sharing of information, but they're there to help you as a resource. And if, for the new folks in particular, is getting oriented, it's never inappropriate to make that call and have that tactful inquiry about, hey, why do we do this or what's that? You know, help me understand background around these issues. Okay, let's dig into some of my suggestions for you all. And that's how I've organized the presentation. This first one may not sound like much of a risk management suggestion, but it really is. I was going to ask just the new folks, but I'll ask everybody. Do you agree with this notion when you become an elected official, your role and relationship to the community changes? Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Pretty dramatically, right? Yeah. So I'm here to tell you, being a local government official from a certain perspective is a 24/7 job, right? Please have a personal life and please enjoy it, but you know how it is in the eyes of your constituents, right? in the eyes of the people you take your counsel from, right, the eyes of the citizen, they're always going to perceive you to be a member of the council, a representative of this council, and a representative of the city, right? So that's an important risk dynamic. And you know how that happens. Do you all interact with the citizens every once in a while? Sure you do, right? Right. You might be doing something on, is it called, what's that summer event called where I get to jump my mountain bike into the river? Fibbar. So you're down there.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, on your own time, I guess.
On your own time, you know, and we had that call, you know.
It's a big risk, you know.
And I told.
So is that covered now?
Yeah.
We talked about that risk exposure. I said, you know, we don't worry too much about that risk exposure. You know, it's not for us to look out for ways to shut down our members' operations. You know, we make risk management suggestions, but more practically, and being an outdoor recreation lover myself, it's been my observation in my 35 years of doing this that risk takers, by and large, really aren't natural plaintiffs. Like skate parks are a good example. We have very, very few claims around skate parks because people want those amenities and they understand the inherent risks that go with them. Yes, do we have claims when there's a tough situation once in a while, right? But I think we had that conversation. I said, is that what you're into down there? You want to jump your mountain bike into the river? Well, let's make sure the rocks are out of the way. Maybe you want to talk to our risk control people, but otherwise, hey, you go for it. Go for it, you know, and if there's a claim, we'll talk about governmental immunity and all that kind of stuff. And we're going to talk more in a little bit about how those concepts work. But I digressed. You're at this festival on a Saturday, you're thinking you're there with your family and friends doing your own thing, and another citizen looks and says, oh, there's a council member. I'm going to go talk to that council member about city business. That hat was never off, right? You know, and as they should, as elected officials, as they should, our words, our deeds, our conduct matters, leaves an impression, right? Definitely when we're making decisions as a council that affect people's livelihoods and their property rights and so on, has an impact, right? And whatever we think of it individually, fair or unfair, right? If that interaction with a citizen doesn't go down the way they thought it might even leave a residue, right? So it's important to remember that in all aspects, right? It's part of the job is to be a good ambassador and representative, right, of your ward and of the city council as a whole. Okay. Also, another thing that happens when you have this change in roles, you're no longer an outsider to local government. You're now insiders, for sure, right? The folks who just got elected took the oath of office, right? Okay, we can get that done within 10 days, I think it says. Within 10 days of the certification of the role. Yeah, okay, that's taken care of. I'm going to date myself here, but back in the old days, when you took the oath of office, the next thing the clerk would do was they would give you this huge book, like hundreds of pages of city ordinances, right? You don't do that anymore, right?
No.
But those things exist. They're out there, right? Those hundreds of pages of rules, ordinances, resolutions, council policies, right? They set the table, both substantively and procedurally, for how you're required to do business. And it's absolutely the case that you might bump up to a rule that you don't like, or that you didn't have a part in adopting, or that you feel you were elected, right, to overturn. But while those rules are in place, right, it's your duty bound to follow those rules, right? You can, as a council, if it's a council rule and you have authority to change it, then you can do that, but only through the appropriate process. So you have to remember that you can't take the attitude now that you're on council and say, well, you know, that council rule of conduct, I never liked that anyway, I'm not going to follow it. There are accountability, right, consequences that flow from that attitude. So you have to be careful of that. Recognize also that the role is broader. Whatever may have brought you to public service, maybe you were a critic or a proponent of a particular issue, the job ask is broader than what may have brought you to the seat, right? And the obligation is to be a good representative on behalf of your ward and the city as a whole with respect to all issues that come in front of you, right? And, you know, it's human nature that some, you know, we like some issues more than others. I love that. I used to be an old water attorney, so I love this presentation about the stream earlier tonight. And so maybe that's your thing, right? Or maybe your thing's the budget. Or maybe you say, I can't stand utility rates, I just want to talk about land use. But the obligation is to make sure you're engaged and prepared and participating in council deliberations on all the issues that come in front of you, okay? And then lastly, more from a legalistic standpoint, recognize that you're fiduciaries, right? We all intuitively understand what that is, right? From an attorney's definition, the fiduciary obligation is this. It's the obligation to put the interest of the entity that we serve as a fiduciary, i.e. the city, right, and the city's in the public interest, above all other interests. Let's go to the next slide, okay? That's going to require us to put the public interest, the city's interest above, right, personal interest, right? Place aside irrelevant considerations, right? It requires us to look at the broader public interest. And sometimes it's going to ask us individually and collectively as a council to set aside the interest of, the small but vocal minority, right? Do you ever have meetings where the room's packed and emotions are kind of running high?
No, we don't have this.
You never have
A couple
that.
times,
We
yeah.
don't have.
Sometimes, on occasion, right? What's our population nowadays?
Just under 6.
Just under 6,000. But even when the room is packed, we're nowhere near, right? That's just a small group of who you were elected to represent. So sometimes, right? And you know how that dynamic can be. It can be tough from where you sit as a council member, right? Somebody stands up during those comments and says, Council, you got to do this and you got to do it tonight. The next person stands up and says, Council, don't do that. Do exactly the opposite and take your time, right? And you're thinking, well, I guess this is a job where I don't get to make 100% of the people happy 100% of the time, right? But in terms of risk management, right, what you want to do then, right, is fall back on what's my fiduciary obligation, right? One of the most important precepts of that, I think, that should be a guide for your decision-making as elected officials is, right, what's the right thing to do for the city as a city, right, in your policy-making decisions, and hopefully for the long haul. But in that situation, a good risk management tool is to remember, what if somebody stands up you have public comment periods, right? And those can be kind of interesting because something can come up that you've never thought. You're like, I got the agenda and I know what's going to go on tonight. And then somebody stands up during public comment, like, wow, where did that, right? So one of your risk management tools in that regard is to make sure that you understand as fiduciaries, right, that it's both your obligation and your prerogative, right, to take the time you need and get the information that you need that'll help you make decisions that serve that fiduciary responsibility. Sure, it might be frustrating to the person who stands up during public comment and says it's a crisis and you got to deal with it tonight, right? But you may be thinking to yourself, well, this is the first I'm hearing of it, right? And there might need some input from the city attorney. Is this even something that we're authorized to get involved in? Or from Christy and her team, hey, is this actually a priority? Do we have budget for this? Do we have resources? What are the options, right? So in terms of helping protect you from risk, right, and serve that fiduciary responsibility, I would say take the time you need and get the information you need to help you make good decisions. It's once in a while, but very infrequent, that you're actually under a firm deadline to make a decision. Now, once in a while, you got to sign a letter that needs to be signed by midnight, right? But that's okay, right? Because you have the material and you can look at that, right? But if something's coming up as a crisis, right, and you're looking at it going, there are many sides to this issue, and as a policymaker, I need to understand it, then that's a good risk management resource.
Were you at our last meeting? Just wondering.
Oh, no. No.
A lot of hypotheticals
Told him
here.
to look at the last couple before he got here to get a feel for it.
All right, let's go to the next slide. Let's see. Okay, this is true for everybody in a public-facing organization, I think. You know what, can we go back one slide? I just want to, yeah, let's see. On the fiduciaries, did we touch on all those points? Yeah, we did. I think that last one, though, is to make sure, whatever noise is going on around an issue, that the fiduciary responsibility asks us to consider issues on their merits alone, okay? We're going to break that down a little bit when I talk about land use decision-making in a little bit, okay? All right, let's go on to the next slide. You ask yourself, what are other attributes of the fiduciary relationship? It's things like, you think about attorney-client, doctor-patient, psychologist-patient, those kind of fiduciary relationships. There's like the duty of accountability, right? That's what you do with regard to the budget and your financial oversight of the organization, right? Duty of transparency, that's what open meetings is all about, right? Being open. those kinds of things. So there's some of the other attributes as well. All right, so it's absolutely true for everybody in a public-facing organization, but I think particularly for elected appointed officials who do most of their work in a public setting, right, is part of their job responsibilities to deliver good governance, which I think both practically and in terms of liability management is just dependent upon committing to a few core civics principles. Now, there are more than what I've listed here, but here's a couple of examples. I've listed the civics principle on the left-hand side of the slide and the corresponding legal issue, liability issue on the right-hand side. So commit to openness and transparency, and we're going to have few, if any, claims, disputes, fights over compliance with Colorado's open meetings law or open records laws, right? We'll talk more about what that means in a minute. Commit yourself to fundamental fairness, and you'll have few of any situations where someone's standing up and says, you know, you're violating my due process rights. So that risk doesn't present itself all that much to elected governing bodies, but the reason for that is staff behind the scenes is taking care of checking the boxes, particularly for public hearing matters, to make sure there's proper notice, that the packet has all the evidence and information that's required, that kind of thing. But it might present itself every once in a while. You have public hearings on land use matters every now and then, or on liquor licensing, and you also are the marijuana licensing board? Okay, so what if the mayor opens up that public hearing and then opens up public comment and somebody, Mayor, I got a problem. Before you start this, at the outset of the hearing, I want to say, I object to your proceeding with this hearing on due process grounds. We say, okay, well, what's that? I object because I didn't get notice, which I always thought was weird because they're standing right there. So they must have found out somehow, So that's the easy one. That's the easy one. But what if they say, I object to your proceeding with this hearing because the legal publication in the newspaper that's required under your code never happened? Or more concerningly for you individually as elected officials, I object on due process grounds to you proceeding with the decision on this liquor license because I believe you have an impermissible conflict of interest and you shouldn't be participating as a judge. So what are we going to do with that risk, right? Yeah, that's when the mayor's going to turn over here and go, staff, do we have proper notice, right? Or if it's a conflict of interest situation, you might need to have a little mini discussion about whether there's a conflict that requires recusal. So in terms of managing that risk from where you're sit, all we want you to do is just make sure you slow it down and make a record of how you're going to handle that. And if everything's actually hunky-dory, that's fine. We just make a record. The clerk says, hey, Mayor, I hear what the person's saying, but actually we did take care of the legal publication, and the proofs of publication are either in the packet or available, and I can put them into the record, and we're good. If there is a real problem that's got hair and warts on it, then maybe we need to continue the hearing a little bit. Yeah. Not everything.
Nice visual.
Yeah, that's a visual. Yeah, some of well, at CIRSA, we're invariably dealing with the stuff that's blown up and has a lot of hair and warts on it, right? So part of the role of it is to have a good risk radar yourself, right? You don't have to have all the answers. You just need to know where the trouble spots are and where the danger is, so that you can then, hey, we need to get more resources on this issue, right? Okay. Predictability and even-handedness, make sure you're doing that, right? You have all those hundreds of pages. It's particularly important for all the citizens, I think, consider this important, but particularly for the business community. They want to make sure, they want to be assured that you're applying the rules in a consistent, predictable, and even-handed manner, right? So that, you don't want to be a community that has a vibe where the rules are different depending on who's making the request, right? Or somebody comes in with a request to city council and they say it's something that's reserved to city council. I'll use an example. I don't know if this is true under your rules. Let's say I need to come to city council in order to get permission to close the street in front of my house for some reason. Maybe I'm doing construction, right? And I go, okay, that was easy enough. I went to staff and I asked them what the application requirements are. They were pretty straightforward. And then I went to council. It was a straightforward discussion. I knew what the rules are. I knew what was expected of me, and no problem. I got my approval easy peasy. But then somebody else who feels like they're in the same exact situation, right? They have a different reaction. They go, oh, well, that's odd because when I made my request, I felt like they were asking for some things that I didn't think were required of me, that cost me extra money. And then when I got to the council, when they were considering my request, there were some strange comments being made, but most concerningly, from a liability standpoint, the night that the council considered my request, that's when the council, for the first time, took some novel and unprecedented interpretation of its own rules and turned me down. Or vice versa, it took a novel approach and approved me, right? The legal claim that comes with that is people who are in similarly situated context may think their equal protection rights are being violated. Hey, I was the same as somebody else, but I was subject to differential treatment for no good reason. That can lend itself to an equal protection claim, or the fancy word there, certiorari, is just a vehicle that you can use to go to Colorado District Court to essentially claim that the decision that was made by the city council was arbitrary, that they went off script, that they didn't follow their own rules and the reasons for the approval or denial were arbitrary, or they made some decision that they didn't have any authority to make, right? So that's the legal risk we see. All right, last one. Commit yourselves to civility and mutual respect with each other, right, as council members, with the staff that you interact with the citizens that you interact with. It sounds like a civics principle, but it's also a liability management tool, I think, because you're going to make some tough decisions, right? That's okay. That goes with the territory, right? But if, you may have a difficult situation where you go ahead, you have that tough deliberation, you make that vote, and people walk away from that. What a great thing it is if they have this reaction. They leave and say, well, you know what? I don't agree with council's decision, but I feel like I was heard. I feel like it was a good process, and I feel like I was respected. And that applies both internally and externally. And I think that even if people disagree with your decision, if that's the sense they have, then their faith and trust in government is going up, and the risk of them wanting to challenge your decision, I think, is going down. Because some of the claimants, knock on wood, not true for a lot of the claims that we see, but sometimes it's the claimant is the person who has the other reaction. They're like, well, not only do I disagree with what council decided, but I feel like they tuned me out. I feel like I was disrespected, right? I feel like the process was such that the decision was made before I even got there. And I'm so mad about it, I'm going to look for some way to legally challenge that, right? So mutuality and civility are important. Do you agree with this notion as well that there's, I like to ask this everywhere I go because all local communities, they're all different. Do you feel like there's a slightly rising tide of incivility in this world, in local government? Has it shown itself here? Because you've all been around.
Just local?
Anyway, well, there's some learned behaviors going on too, right?
Yeah, I think we're pretty privileged that this is my opinion, but I do feel like we're a pretty civil group here with each other.
Yeah.
Says a lot.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. And don't let, don't let that outlier situation, right, sway you from your commitment to civility and mutual respect with each other and everyone you interact with. Now, in my world, it's absolutely the case that there are individuals whose professed hobby is to go to city council meetings to push your buttons and engage in incivil behavior with the hope that you'll overreact and somehow violate their civil rights. So the point to remember here, right, is that the job sometimes is going to ask of you, right, that we maintain our commitment to civility even in the face of incivility. But you're up to the task. You are the leaders of the community. You can control 99.99%, right, of the dynamics of how you deal with those issues, right? So you'll be in a good place. Just have you ever had a First Amendment auditor visit? Or anyone like that?
Haven't.
Okay. All right. Well,
We're waiting.
that's a different training, and we have resources around that issue, but that's not a question of if, that's a question of when. Okay. Let's pivot and go to the next suggestion, which is honor transparency. I'm sure that for the new folks, this is probably mostly for the new folks, but it's also just a reminder about the fact, for the new folks, is this your first service on a public body? Oh, okay. So you've been around the open meetings law a little bit. Okay. So we all know that individually and collectively, we are subject to the Colorado Open Meetings Law. So doing business in the public sector in a local government in Colorado is completely different than the private sector. We can do most of our work in the open, but make sure we understand and commit to the openness requirement of the Colorado Open Meetings Law. And that basically says this: whenever 3 or more members of the city council meet to discuss public business, right? That's a meeting that has to be open to the public. So 3 or more discussion of public business simply means the public has the right to hear that discussion. Doesn't mean necessarily that they have a right to have input in that discussion, but they get to hear it. If it's a required public hearing, then definitely they have a right to provide their comments, okay? So there's a distinction there. And then the other piece is to recognize that if 4 or more people are gonna participate in the discussion, 4 or more council members, or you're gonna take any kind of action, that can only occur at a duly noticed public meeting. In fact, city councils can only take action at a public meeting, agendized public meeting, okay? So keep those things in mind. For purposes of the statute, a meeting is any kind of gathering convened to discuss public business, whether it's in person like we're doing now, by phone, or by, they added this phrase in 1996, or by electronic means, which back at that time meant email, when they made that server made the funny noise, right? But now, do you think it applies electronic means? Does it apply to texting, you think? Yeah, what about Snapchat? What about WhatsApp? What about, was it Signal? Our own state legislature got crosswise with the open meetings law because they were engaging in, I think it was Signal was the app they were using. It was a disappearing message app where multiple members of the legislature were communicating with each other about public business. Now,
How did they catch them if the messages disappear?
well, people who were newly elected, as part of being brought into the fold, they were sort of.
Tell them.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna, they self-identified.
Oh, okay.
They
So-
self-identified, people who got newly elected to the legislature said, what are we doing here? Right? And so they then committed collectively that they wouldn't do that anymore. Now, here's the difference, and don't kill the messenger, here's the difference. The next year, the legislature went in and amended the open meetings law to exempt themselves from certain provisions, but not local government officials, okay? So recognize, right, that 3 or more, if it's a 3 or more discussion of the merits or substance of policy issues or other business that's in front of the city council, then that has to be an open meeting. It doesn't apply to social gatherings, doesn't apply to purely chance meetings where, 4 of you bump into each other at Brown Dog Coffee. Did I get that right?
Well, yeah.
Probably Topo, but.
Wherever it is,
For ice cream, I guess.
for ice cream there. Or I went to a sandwich place today.
Sweeties?
I did.
Yes.
You bump into each other at Sweeties, does the local government gadfly have a claim when they say, oh, there's 4 members of council, doing business in secret? No, as long as the chance gathering or the social does not become a vehicle, right? As long as it doesn't turn to have the primary purpose of a discussion of public business. So it's perfectly fine, and it's part of the job to, get to know each other, right? But you can't, if you're at Sweeties, 3 or 4 of you say, oh, hey, glad to bump into you. I wanted to talk with the 2 of you about tomorrow night's agenda and the budget amendment that Christie's got on the agenda. What do you think of it? How are you going to vote? Not permissible. You're now having a discussion of the merits or substance of public business outside of that openness requirement. Okay, let's see. It truly is a rule of 3. And the municipal bar will fight like heck for the concept that it's always a rule of 3. By the way, staff isn't counted. So 2 members of council can meet with the city administrator, and that's not required to be an open meeting, okay? 3 or more, the openness requirement applies. 1-on-1 does not, right? And it's an important part of the job for the new folks, sit down with the mayor and have a coffee and get to understand some background and things like that. That's fine, right? 3 or more, openness rule applies. 1-on-1, it doesn't. But what do you think about this kind of meeting? 1-on-1 on 1-on-1 on 1-on-1 on 1. Sometimes they call that a serial meeting or a daisy chain meeting. In Texas, they call it a walking quorum. Okay, and the whole idea here is this. I'll just cut to the chase on the liability side. If the evidence comes into a court that what's really going on at your meeting is a mere rubber stamping of decisions that were reached outside of the meeting through some daisy chain type of meeting or one-on-one discussions, then that would be found to be a violation of the open meetings law, right? So we all intuitively know that, right? But we can't, for example, say, well, we had this issue come up and we need to approve a contract for some spending within council's authority, but we don't have time for a meeting, so let's just call each other one at a time and ask each other how we vote. Would that be permissible?
No.
No. You gotta put together a emergency meeting or find some other way to do it. And you have a remote participation policy that I think helps facilitate this if it's necessary. So just be careful of that dynamic. So,
Sam,
yes.
how does a statutory treasurer apply in that situation? Because a treasurer does not contain the right to vote.
Yeah, if you're not a member of this public body.
Correct.
So you wouldn't be counted as part of the local public body for open meetings law purposes.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Subject to confirming with Nina or Jeff.
Okay for Ben to be a third wheel, but none of the rest of us can.
Well, thank you.
All right, so that's that. So as I mentioned, it applies to electronic communications. Email is a wonderful thing, but just remember that it's not the appropriate vehicle for discussions among 3 or more members of the merits or substance of policy issues you have in front of you, okay? So I have another handout that talks more about that risk, what it really means. It's called Email Suggestions for Elected and Appointed Officials, and I take full responsibility for that. Talks a little bit more about the risk and then kind of has my list of suggestions of how to make effective use of email without running afoul of the statute, and then some things you want to stay away from. But one of the most important aspects of this job is information flow, right? So I would encourage you, do you all have city-issued email addresses? Mm-hmm. I would encourage you to use those. I would encourage you to include your city administrator, who's your eyes and ears to help with the communication flow. And in this risk exposure can be your eyes and ears to help you, right, avoid an inadvertent violation of the open meetings law. Because if she's copied on the email, she can spot that and say, okay, all right, let's not reply all, let's not do that. I'll put that on the next work session agenda for you if I see whatever the threshold amount of interest is. And then you all can get into an appropriate safe harbor under the, which is a public meeting and have that discussion. Okay? So be careful of that issue as well. All right. We do separate trainings on this, but I thought I'd just ask for curiosity. Is anybody active on social media?
Right now?
Yeah, right now.
Taking a break.
Taking a break, all right.
Just for holidays.
All right. Well, we've written and taught a lot on the social media and social media risks. I have to say, the U.S. Supreme Court actually raised the standard for a plaintiff to impose liability upon a public official. But this is one of the situations where that's not the most, it's absolutely there. Like if you have a official social media site where you hold out that I'm an elected official and you can talk to me on social media, right? And you decide you want to do that and say, hey, talk to me about anything. And you know how it goes on social media, right? The first couple of comments are things you don't like. You can definitely have civil rights liability if you decide, well, I'm just going to block that person, right? Or I'm going to delete their comments, but I'm not going to do it for anybody else. That would still be a violation, most likely, of that person's First Amendment rights, subject to some higher standards set by the U.S. Supreme Court. So I think a lot of the risk around social media is the more practical risk, right? Of and nothing on social media from an elected or appointed official necessarily gets away. No good deed goes unpunished, right? So be careful of that. I think social media is a good tool for reemphasizing the good things, the positive things you're doing, but it's not a good vehicle for adjudication of the issues that you're facing that you should be wrestling with in this room, right? Okay. Let's see. All right, separate from the open meetings law, Colorado state law says that the correspondence of elected officials is a matter of public record. Huh, that's interesting. With some limited exceptions, right? So the clerks will tell you they get public records requests for the emails of elected officials. When does that happen? Well, could happen in any context, but one that's pretty common is some controversial decision is made. Someone wants to learn more about the background of that decision, and so they file a records request and say, I'd like the packet, any other staff materials, and I'd like all email communications of the elected officials relating to that matter. And now we're under a legal obligation to produce those, right? So with regard to email, my takeaway in managing risk here is don't say in an email anything you wouldn't want to say in the meeting as a public official, as a council member, right? Or have read back to you in a deposition or read in the newspaper, right? There are some very limited exceptions to this disclosure requirement, but again, the statute says the correspondence of elected officials is a matter of public record. Now, even if it's protectable against a CORA request, in civil litigation, the right in discovery is broader than CORA, right? And you can see where I'm going, like where do plaintiffs want to look for the meat and potatoes that they think is going to support their claim, particularly if it has to do with animus or motive. They want to get at the so-called cloistered communications, which aren't, so don't assume they're cloistered, right? Frankly, if it's a matter where you as a council feel like you need to have a confidential discussion with each other and you have authority to do it, then the only place where we can really assure that your communications will be protected are those on legal matters with an attorney, right? If it's a properly authorized and duly noticed executive session for legal matters. So if you ever have a liability or legal issue you want to talk about, then get together with your administrator and say, I have some questions about this. Is the way I can communicate with the attorney that's going to be privileged, right, on that issue. Okay, let's go on. Another slide here. Next one. All right, so we've been talking mostly about the obligation to do things in an open meeting setting. You are allowed to have executive sessions, private discussions, but only for a limited number of topics, right? And only after you follow all these procedures. So new folks, have you been through an executive session yet? Okay. Staff's going to help you with that. You probably use a script, okay? The only thing we would suggest from your risk management perspective is it's never inappropriate if we're making that announcement or motion to go into executive session, everybody ought to have their ears open and make sure we did everything right. And if it doesn't sound right, there's no harm in saying, hey, did we get that right? Did we say everything on the record that we need to say? Because once you adopt that motion and go into executive session, there are no do-overs, right? And so we do have some folks, there is an interesting thing about executive session compliance is our courts recently confirmed that almost anyone in the state has standing to bring a challenge to your compliance here in Salida with the executive session requirements. They don't have to be a citizen here. They don't even have to have any interest in the subject matter that you're talking about. So in my world, I have this industry of, budding industry of folks, and this is a good thing because we're transparent, but of attorneys who watch your meeting recordings, look at your minutes, and they're looking for technical violations of the statute, right? So that's why it's important to rely upon staff and also, you know, speak up if you feel like, hey, is there something that we need to correct to make sure we go into executive session, okay? Sounds like you got good procedures in place. Here's the more, let's go to the next slide, more important piece from a fiduciary aspect. And let me unpackage it this way let's go through this scenario real quick. So we're going into executive session for the purpose of developing a strategy for negotiating a purchase of vacant land. We can do that. We can't make the decision to buy the property in executive session, but state law allows us to have an executive session for purposes of developing strategy and instructing negotiators and determining positions. But we can't make any decisions in executive session. So in my scenario here, we're in executive session. We've got an appraisal that helps us with our understanding of potential value. And in the executive session, council can give instructions to a negotiator. We instruct that our city administrator meet with the property owner and negotiate for a purchase price of $200,000, which is the low end of the appraisal. But human nature being what it is, Councilmember Smith, excited to get things moving. The next day sees the property owner out somewhere and tells the property owner, hey, the city's willing to pay $200,000 for your parcel of property, and we might even go as high as 225. Because that's what the appraisal says. Do we have problems?
Yes.
Yeah.
Who's the injured party? People call me and ask me this question. I say, well, if we're going to talk about legal rights and remedies, who's the injured party here?
The city.
Yeah. Yeah, and from another perspective, in terms of your relationship institutionally, what about the member? What about Member Smith?
Oh,
Can be trusted.
yeah.
Member Smith's got to come back next time and say, do you trust me? Right?
Yeah, no.
Yeah, so, look, you got to have a supermajority vote to go into executive session, right? But the fiduciary responsibility does include the responsibility to protect the confidential information of the corporation as determined, in this case, by the council. And no individual member, right, has the authority to waive and release confidential information on behalf of the city. Now, there's some all sorts of nuanced issues around there, but that means we need to be on the same page about confidentiality. And that's true even if you voted against going into executive session, and even if you can't stand the underlying matter that was discussed. It's our obligation as fiduciaries to honor that responsibility. So how do we get on the same page? I would suggest a tool like this. Maybe it's the mayor. If he's leading the executive session discussion, we say, okay, all right, before we break, great, we've got our instructions to Christie to go talk to the landlord. Before we leave the executive session, let's talk about this. Of all the confidential information that we've discussed in this executive session, which information, if any, right, leaves this executive session, and who's our spokesperson? And now we're on the same page. And if we all agree, no, there's nothing to share at this time, then that's the commitment that we've made, right? So I know that can be frustrating individually. Somebody may say, well, you know, I'm a big champion of transparency and I don't like that. What's your remedy? Is it to go and share with some citizen what you learned in executive session?
No.
No.
What's your remedy?
Well, you could resign your position.
Yeah?
Because you
Yeah?
really
Are
have
you
no-
bound by the confidentiality rule still?
Yeah, you're still bound.
Probably.
Yeah.
It's to get together with your colleagues and talk it through some more. And you may get to the same conclusion, but if you're feeling frustrated by that, you know, I would suggest this tactic. Next time, particularly for these negotiation ones, you often have multiple sessions of, discussion as you're trying to formulate a strategy. But it's next time, right, and say, isn't there something that we can share? Right? And if the answer is no, I think it would impair, our standing on behalf of the citizens to get the best deal if we shared anything here. But you go back and you talk it through, right? And you get on the same page of that. The other thing is, remember executive sessions, you've decided that you're serving the interest of your constituents by having the executive session. You can build faith and trust by reminding them of that. So you can, like, at the end of the executive session, you come back out in open session, whatever it looks like to you. I have some of our members and some of the entities that I represented back when I was a city attorney. We would come out of executive session and we'd say something like, they'd always, the ones I represented, they always wanted me to do it. And I was like, thanks.
Same.
I just want to remind everybody, I just want to confirm for the record, that the executive session was solely for strategy to instruct the negotiator. I just want to remind everybody that it involved a potential purchase of property. And please rest assured, citizens, that if our strategy ever gets traction, we will have, right, at a future meeting, an agenda item and an opportunity, right, for open discussion about any transaction before we make any decisions. And people, oh, I get it now. Now I know why they're doing that, right? That kind of thing's, I think, helpful to them. So another interesting thing about executive sessions from where you sit is Colorado law requires that the executive session be recorded, except in those instances where the attorney asks that the tape be turned off because they're engaging in a privileged attorney-client communication. So when you're in executive session, remember the tape is still running. So courtesy, tact, diplomacy still matter, right? We never want to be in one of those scorched earth litigation situations where it's a motive or an animus case, and lo and behold, my goodness, my name is attached to that zinger. Oops, not good, right? So be careful of that. By the way, we only keep those tapes for 90 days, right? And then unless the attorneys say otherwise, then those tapes are destroyed. And they're not freely accessible. They're only there as a record in case someone files a legal challenge to the substance of the executive session. Okay, enough about that. Let's talk just a little bit about a few more meeting issues. So particularly for the new folks, but as a reminder for everyone, remember that the agenda is there to set the table for what you're going to do that evening. You got tons of stuff going on, and the agenda there is to help you maintain focus and energy on what you've decided we're going to tackle this evening, right? So it's got an important risk management aspect because you want to be careful about, you don't want to really add items to the agenda night of, right? There's been a lot of litigation around that issue because the statute says the agenda shall include specific agenda information where possible.
Right, and
Okay.
it has to be 24 hours, right? We can't even add anything day of, can we?
Ask Nina and Jeff.
Okay.
Perfect.
Ask Nina and Jeff. I think there's maybe a qualitative difference. But I look at it this way. In terms of risk management, I call it the empty chair principle. You know, because with the best of intentions, we might forget something, right? And we go, oh, I meant to get together with Christy and ask if a couple of us wanted this on the agenda, and darn it, we just forgot. So now we're at the approval of the agenda. At the beginning of the agenda, we say, hey, can I add this? I would encourage you to look at it as the empty chair principle. Is there a chair in the room that's empty that would have been filled had someone known that we were going to talk about that issue this evening? That's an important aspect of maintaining faith and trust, right? So, and it's probably the case in many, many years, there aren't many true emergencies that require us to add a blockbuster item the night of, right? So be careful of that. All right. Let's see, we do in local government pride ourselves on being, you know, somewhat informal and approachable and so on, but I like your room setup, right? You want to maintain some sense of formality. You're the board of directors, the governing body doing the government's work, so we want to have some little systems in place, whatever that looks like, to help maintain formality and decorum. You know, I don't know if you require speakers be recognized or come up here, right? Public comment period, you have little tips and things. Mayor probably says a couple things at the beginning, right? During public comments, is it a back and forth with the citizens, or it's just their opportunity, to provide comments? Yeah. That can be tough individually sometimes. You know, do I get 3 minutes? Okay. And what's the limitation on what I can say?
I don't
think there is any.
One.
Never
And,
really.
I mean, if you're like threatening,
Yeah, as long as I'm not inciting a riot or spewing sexualized obscenity, I'm probably in the clear,
yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yeah,
So-
nothing like that.
Yeah, you know how it
That's happened,
goes. Hopefully you haven't faced this problem, but I got 3 minutes. Mayor calls me up and 30 seconds into it, you know how it goes. You know, you're all crooks and liars and I can't stand you in particular. You know, that hurts to be on the receiving end of a personal attack. But I'm pretty certain there's nothing you're going to be able to say in the moment that's going to change that person's mind. So you just let them have their 2.5 additional minutes and you thank them and you move on to the next speaker. I would say this in terms of practical liability risk management. If things are getting out of hand, your best risk management tool that keeps you individually and collectively in the safest spot is just to take a recess. Take a recess, okay? And that takes the wind out of those people's sails anyway. You know, nothing deflates them more than getting angry in an empty room, okay? But you have every right to take a recess, particularly if it's getting out of control where you can't do your work. But you don't want to direct that the person be removed from the meeting because of the viewpoint of what they're saying or the content of their speech, right? Unless it falls into one of those very narrow exceptions, okay? Okay, you all adopted Bob's Rules of Order, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's great thing. And the mayor, you know, the gavel and the mayor's prerogative should be recognized. You don't even have a gavel up there.
No, man, we got rid of the gavel a while ago. I can do that.
That kind of thing. Yeah, but part of sometimes even with Bob's rules, it can get a little complicated. Just recognize that the mayor can help guide that. You know, can look up and down the dais and say, well, are we all of consensus that this is how we'll handle this procedural issue? Because it can get a little tricky. Somebody goes, I make a motion, and somebody says, I'd like to make a friendly amendment, and somebody says, I don't like your amendment, so I'm going to make an unfriendly amendment. The mayor says, let's just sort this out bit by bit. Is everybody okay with that? Right, but if you need to, make sure you're looking at Bob's, and Bob's has a nice little cheat sheet in the back of just 2 or 3 pages on the most common procedural issues that come up. But you want to use procedural rules to facilitate getting work done. All right, let's turn over to the next topic. And suggestion 3 is to commit to supporting the city structure. It's absolutely the case that everybody within a municipal organization has a job description. That's true whether you're elected, appointed, volunteer, or a full-time staff member, right? And so it's important that everyone honor and respect their particular role within the organization to help ensure that we're using resources effectively, that decision-making is being made by the right people through the right processes, and that we're mutually supportive. We're not silos, but there's allocation of authority and job responsibilities that help us fire on all cylinders if we're doing things the right way. So more to the liability risk first before I unpackage some suggestions. For the new folks in particular, it's a fair question, but I hope it wasn't your first question for the city attorney, and that's the question of, can I get sued and be held individually and personally liable for something that I do or don't do as a city council member? And the answer is, yes, you can. Okay, but here's the good news. So it is a fair question, but the great news is we have very strong protections in Colorado for you, okay? And here's how it works. And what I'm talking about here, for example, is whether someone can sue you in state court and hold you individually and personally liable for tort liability because you're an elected official, okay? And the statute basically says this. It says the city, and by extension the city's insurance company, SURSA, will defend you and pay judgments entered against you for acts or omissions as an elected official. Like so many things in life, there's a bit of a catch to that, and that's this. Those protections apply only so long as we are acting within the scope of our employment and not acting in a willful and wanton manner. So scope of employment sounds odd because you're an elected part-time citizen legislator, but that's the phrase that's used in the statute. It just simply means you need to understand scope of employment really means from where you sit, scope of authority. What's my job description as an elected official? So here's a really easy example of how that principle works using your own ordinances. Within the city of Salida, under our own ordinances, within whose job description, within whose scope of employment is it to decide whether or not someone gets a short-term rental license?
That's the city clerk, right?
Well, yeah.
City clerk. I think your ordinance says city administrator or city clerk. So you flipped a coin and you got that job?
That's 2 out of 3.
So within whose scope of employment ain't it?
Hours.
Yeah, not only you, but everybody else, right? It's not the treasurer, it's not for the planning director, it's for the city clerk. That was by your own design. That's an even more, short-term rental is an interesting thing because you do have a little bit within your job description, but that's only if only if you decide to bring a revocation or suspension hearing to revoke or suspend someone's short-term rental license, then that's part of your job, which is all the more reason you stay away from the other aspects of that, right? Your job was to set the policy. You adopted your short-term rental, right? So within whose scope of employment is to decide whether we regulate short-term rentals in the first place. Staff may be saying, we need a short-term rental license ordinance. We need it, but who decides in the first instance whether we're going to have that or not?
We do.
The legislators. Yeah, so that's just some examples. You know, you can think of any number of things, whether it's election activities, law enforcement activities. Obviously, with regard to law enforcement, within whose scope of employment is to decide whether someone gets a ticket in the municipal court.
The officer.
The officers. The officers. That's law enforcement authority. So within whose scope of employment ain't it?
Hours.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, you want to stay at that high level. You know, you resource those departments through the budget and so on, but you've already decided by your own ordinance or by state statute that those activities are within somebody else's scope of employment. All right, the other interesting phrase is willful and wanton. You're protected as long as you're not engaging in willful and wanton conduct, right? And that's just a strange phrase that means this. It's conduct that's intentionally undertaken, designed to injure someone's legal rights and taken with reckless disregard for what their rights are. And I just call it bad stuff. Right? So you want to stay away from bad stuff, and it is bad stuff, right? And we don't get a lot of claims for bad stuff every year, but we get a couple every year where some plaintiff is alleging that some elected or appointed official or employee went off the rails and was engaging in bad stuff. And it almost always arises in this context, my claims people tell me. Willful and wanton allegations are almost always built on this. It's almost always an individual, elected or appointed official or employee, misperceiving that they have some governmental authority that they actually don't have, throwing on the purported cloak of governmental authority and doing bad things to people for the wrong reasons. And it really would be bad stuff. Maybe it'd be like with that purported cloak of governmental authority for no good reason other than that, you know, I just want to go after my political enemy or business competitor. I can script the clerk into going on a campaign to make sure that that person's short-term rental license gets denied or gets suspended or revoked, or they don't get a building permit, or maybe wearing this purported cloak of governmental authority, I decide that I have a right to defame people and publish facts that I know to be untrue, right, and that are defamatory. Well, there's no protection for that sort of intentional, right, maliciousness, right? So keep that in mind. Let's go to the next slide. The double, not to sound like the Grim Reaper here, but just remember there's kind of a double whammy aspect to this because it affects your insurance as well. Your insurance coverage, good news is you got public officials liability coverage through CIRSA, provides you with coverage against claims for alleged wrongful acts, because after all, it is possible to kind of negligently, mistakenly violate someone's civil rights, and that's where the protection's there. But if we do it maliciously, intentionally, right, then that protection can go away because the public officials' liability coverages follow the same concepts. They provide you with coverage in your capacity as an elected official, but they have exceptions for things like willful and wanton conduct, criminal acts, right, malicious acts, that kind of thing, okay? All right, so that's the state law concept. The federal law concept is somewhat similar. You do have protection. Sorry, new folks, but it's possible to be sued under both state or federal law, right? But under federal law, we have good protection as well. It's called qualified immunity. You probably read about that and see it on the news with respect to police officers a lot. But the concept of qualified immunity applies to any governmental actor. That's you, right? And it applies you individually and you collectively. And it gives you protection from personal liability for violation of federal law, but only insofar as your conduct does not violate clearly established statutory or constitutional rights of which a reasonable person would have known. And my favorite phrase as the attorney that you should be most concerned about is that last part of would have known. And you're thinking to yourself, how do I know? This isn't my, right? So that's where having a good risk radar, right? Somebody stands up in a meeting, says, you got some very dicey conditional use permit on the agenda, and the applicant, in an attempt to save their application, which they see is sinking, they say, if you vote me down, I'm going to sue each and every one of you for a constitutional, violation of my constitutional rights. That's when you're going to have your risk radar on and use your resources. You don't have to have the answer. You just need to go, slow things down and probably talk to your attorney about, hey, are we getting on thin ice here, right? So, and that's where they're going to help you. You want to give your attorneys a little bit of grace when you get that, hey, do we have a constitutional problem here? Give them a little grace when they give you that lawyer answer that says what? Mm-hmm. It depends. It depends, right? Because particularly federal civil rights law is so fact intensive, right? So fact specific that it really does depend. But the giving them the grace means give yourself the protection of building in a little time. Because if you want to move forward, I don't care if it's, short-term rentals has a lot of constitutional issues around it. On the Front Range, oil and gas regulation, mandatory housing ordinances, we see constitutional challenges to that, those kinds of things. So if you have questions about those, build in the time and space to get the legal advice you need so that you're feeling comfortable, right, with whatever the risk level is with respect to federal law as well, right? So, okay. That's really it, other than to recognize that be careful of, particularly in civil rights litigation, the risk exposure can get worse if it's perceived or appears that our decision was retaliatory, right, or was an overreaction, right? And that's where, as I've said back earlier, you really have the great ability to control how your discussions go forward on those issues. All right, let's talk about the city's organizational structure, because this is all kind of background for saying, well, what's my job description? Right, as a council member, what do I do? So just remember, that you've committed significant resources to the organizational structure that you have, which is essentially a council administrator, right? It's a policy administrative distinction, right? And as the citizen, volunteer, part-time legislators, it says so right in your code and in state statute, you are collectively, right, the legislative and corporate body. And in contrast, your city administrator is the administrative head of the city government under the direction and control of the mayor and council. So your administrator is responsible for the day-to-day, right? So you want to embrace that. You've committed a lot of resources to that, right? And you want to embrace that as a risk principle as well. Let's go to the next slide. Another way of looking at this is, where does the council and its members focus their energy and effort within the organizational structure? And I would suggest that you all are in the top 2 tiers here, right? I think it says in your council handbook or your orientation packet, right? The city council is the part of the organization that deals with the ownership. Who are our owners?
Who are our owners? Yeah.
Yeah, you're part of, you're one of your primary job responsibilities to help determine the needs and wants of the community and how we put governmental resources on that, right? Mm-hmm. Right? And remember, like, if we have a vacancy in a department head, well, your administrator can appoint an interim department head to do that administrative work, right? But if council's decided they don't want to do legislative work and they want to do administrative work, well, we can't appoint an interim council to pay attention to the things that you all need to spend energy on. So you want to make it a hallmark of your tenure to embrace your job responsibilities at the upper tiers here, right? And I think in terms of that is examples of legislative and corporate governance, and your job description is policy setting, big picture stuff, the looking forward rather than dealing with day-to-day stuff. The important documents from where you sit are not individual pay stubs or individual personnel decisions, but it's things like the budget, the master plan, long-term transportation plan, intergovernmental relationships policy, right? You have the longest time horizon in the organization, right? You have the broadest interest in mind, and that's the unique role that the council takes the leadership for and the responsibility for, okay? Let's go to the next slide. All right, here's a couple of tips around this to avoid risks and concerns around role discipline. Just, we know this intuitively, but we're all elected individually to bring our own experiences, voices, perspectives to issues, right? So yes, deliberate with many voices, but at the end of the day, we're all working towards what? The one voice of council, right? Individual and collective success means collaboration and bringing people around to my point of view, right? But in terms of actual authority, recognize that elected officials act primarily as a body by voting in public meetings. Yes, you do have ambassadorship roles, right? Eyes and ears of the community, but in terms of taking action, you can only do that collectively, right? Sometimes there's a temptation to say, well, we got a 7-member council. That means I must own 1/7 of the power, and darn it, I'm gonna go use it, right? Right? Of all those hundreds of pages, there's no ordinance that says the powers of the council may be exercised individually by one council member. So you got to be willing to, collaborate to find those votes, right? Or as we'll talk about in a minute, be willing to set that aside if we're not able to find the votes, okay? This is a great thing, is to recognize that idea of allocation of authority. They're really, in my world, we call them delegations of authority. They permeate state law and your ordinances, and that's a great thing because it frees up your time. Like the short-term rental ordinance is a perfect example. You said, we don't want to spend our time on every individual license. We just want to set the framework, the policy framework, and then the clerk will take care of that, right? So respect theirs because they're there to serve and protect you, right? They serve you because they free up your time for the governance stuff, and they protect you because, let's say, I'll show you how they protect you in real terms. If somebody doesn't get their short-term rental license, in my world, if they want to challenge that legally, the defendants ought to be the city, and the city clerk in her official capacity, which is just another way of naming the city. And the defendants ought not to be city council member Sam, Tom, and Bill, right? Right? But once in a while, some plaintiff will dream up the idea that I want to name Sam, Tom, and Bill as defendants because my short-term rental license was turned down. And that's when we try to tell the plaintiff, hey, did you read the org chart in the ordinance? You know, these people should not be defendants because they delegated all this authority. They have no responsibility for it. And you don't want a plaintiff's attorney who says, well, I read all that, but my allegation is not that the city clerk was making the decision. My allegation is that there were individual elected or appointed officials behind the scenes directing that she deny that. That's not a good place to be, right? So embrace the delegations, they protect you, okay? Last thing on this, do you have reports during your meetings?
Yep.
Or council? This may never translate to a third-party liability risk, but be careful of this in terms of maintaining the strength and cohesiveness of the council as an institution. Maybe the mayor says, okay, it's time for council member reports. I say, Mayor, I've got something to report. Since our last meeting, I did this. And everyone goes, you did what? All the eyes open wide, right? That may never create a liability to a third party, but it's a wise governing body that's attuned to that question, that issue. Because to the extent you can, you probably want to work towards agreed upon norms and expectations about how we purportedly represent the council and do work on behalf of the council and the city in between meetings, right? Because if we're not attentive to that and don't work to get on the same page, then you might end up spending a deductible or a lot of time and energy in an actual legal dispute. I've had people ask and actually bring legal challenges to remove people from office because of friction around this issue. And the removal from office is a difficult liability issue, right? So it's better to be on the same page. I think if it's going legal, then it's kind of like we weren't willing, eyes up as a council, to have that discussion with each other as equals about, hey, what should we be doing in this regard? Okay? All right. Let's go to the next slide. Where are we at? All right, last thing around role discipline is to recognize that it's particularly important in the area of employment relationships and administrative matters, as I touched on. You as a city council, well, how many total employees do we have now, Dave, Christie?
A little over 100.
A little over 100. And how many of those employees does the city council supervise?
Zero, yeah.
Christie.
City administrator, anybody else?
The Christies.
Christie's, city administrator, city clerk? is
City,
that? Attorney?
Municipal court.
And judge. 4 out of 100 or more. I'm here to tell you from a risk management standpoint, from where you sit, what a great place to be.
yeah.
What a great place to be, right? Because employment practices liability risk is as pervasive as the air we breathe, right? And that ballot said, I'm running for legislator, policymaker, not HR manager, right? Now, for your direct reports, you do want to pay attention to that and have hopefully good, mutually agreed upon methods for evaluating performance, giving direction, having check-ins. But for the rest of it, recognize, right, that your code and your own organizational structure says the city administrator, right, is the personnel director who's responsible for establishing the personnel rules and regs that you take a final look at, is that right, before they're approved? Or, yeah. I can't remember. I think it's, your ordinance says that the administrator is responsible for development, and they're subject finally to council approval. Maybe, not sure. Sorry about that.
It's well written, whoever did it.
Yeah, it depends. you know.
Depends on.
Well,
We don't want to answer that now.
yeah,
so
it
it
depends. It depends. And then, it says you've delegated by ordinance. It says as your chief administrative officer, the city administrator is responsible and has authority to appoint, supervise, and discharge all non-elected department heads and employees. So that's a good place to be from where you sit, right, as you've delegated that authority. Council does have an appropriate role in certain personnel issues like overall pay plan, overall determination of benefits, selection and supervision of direct reports, but you want to keep it at that high level, right? And you don't want to get individually and inappropriately involved in a personnel issue that has already been delegated and is the responsibility of the administrator and supervisors downstream of the administrator. So, But I'm not naive around this. When I was a city and town attorney, I know that this pressure can come internally or externally, right? Or even from ourselves, right? What if a citizen, had some interaction with an employee at City Hall, they didn't like the way that interaction went down, what are they gonna do? They're gonna call their elected official. And say, I want you to do something about that employee. And what do you want to do about that as an elected official?
I would say I could share your story with the city administrator.
Yeah, I would encourage you to go to the city administrator and unburden yourself of that issue, right?
Yes, unburden yourself.
Unburden yourself. It might create some other burden, but unburden yourself from that issue and give your administrator some grace when she says, I got it, because that's in her job description, right? And be careful of this, so much about civil liability risk in the employment world is about retaliation, right? So give her some grace when she says, I got it, right? And I'm only gonna give you more information on a need-to-know basis, which may be never. Because part of that is to protect you from retaliation risk. So much about it is who knew what when. Just trust that there are systems in place through your personnel policies and other rules and regulations that help ensure, right, that employees' concerns are being heard, that if they're going to be the subject of some discipline or something like that, there's a process for doing that, but it's not administered by the council collectively or individual council members. So I've had claims, where even with the best of intentions, an elected or appointed official gets involved in some personnel issue down in the organization, and unfortunately it all blows up and there's a lawsuit, and we've got to interview that elected or appointed official because the plaintiff's now saying, hey, they told me this. And so we got to figure out who said what. We have to take their deposition. I've never had an elected or appointed official who had their deposition taken ever come back to me and say, hey, that was a lot of fun, let's do it again. Okay? So, yeah, unburden yourself from that stuff, except for your direct reports. It's a wonderful thing to have that investment in organizational structure where, just like a private corporation, you have a CEO, right, who's your point of contact and is accountable and responsible for dealing with those things on behalf of the organization. So that's an important piece of that. The administrative issues, I think we talked about when we talked about short-term rentals. So this is all not to say, administrative matters are not, entirely hands-off. As elected officials, you're entitled to ask questions and get information, but be respectful of that process that's in place and recognize that when that citizen comes to you, are they trying to do an end run and conscript you into an end run, right? Around the very processes that you work so hard to put in place and work year over year to resource appropriately, right? That's true whether it's personnel or administrative matters. So, and the risk can come from the inside too. What if someone comes up to you and says, psst, can I talk to you about my boss?
No. No, you can't.
I don't know, whenever you're, prepared, hey, we love and appreciate our employees, but I, as a council member, and we as a council, we don't deal with employment issues at that level. I encourage you to talk to your supervisor, the HR people, the city administrator, someone else, right? So, and that'll serve you well. Any questions around that stuff? Yeah, keep rolling. Let's keep rolling. All right, lastly on this concept of city structure is just recognize that I do think being on an elected multi-member governing body does sometimes ask of us that we commit to certain personal conduct that, we don't really prefer personally, but it's in view of strengthening the council as an institution, right? Because municipal service is kind of like being on a train with our community, being the train on that track, trying to get wherever our community's going. And during our tenure in office, we're on board that train, in the engine room, help stoke the engine to get our community wherever it wants to go. And part of the fiduciary responsibility, if I can spin out the analogy, is to help make that engine stronger. But once in a while, it's going to bump up against this, I don't really want to do that individually, right? And here are some examples, right? Some of the personal sacrifices that being a member of a multi-member elected governing body might require is setting aside a personal interest or agenda when there's lack of support. That can be frustrating, but it might even be, hey, I ran for office because I want to make sure that our city has an ordinance that does this. But if I can't find 3 members that come along with me, right? It can be very destructive to the work of the council, right? For that individual to keep pursuing that personal interest or agenda, you have to be willing to put that on the shelf. Mayor, do you ever have any split votes?
Very rarely,
Very rarely?
ideally.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's good. I mean, you know, if you're getting to consensus, it probably means we've had a good, healthy deliberation where everyone's really thought through the issue. We probably started with some disagreements, we worked through and saw, you know. But, you know, you have to be careful if you have a 4-3 vote and you're on the 3 side of the 4-3 vote, is it okay to go back to your people and say, I didn't vote for that stinker? Well, sure it is. You can tell your people whatever you want. I'm just an insurance guy. You know, you can tell, but they already know how you voted, right?
Yeah.
So is it more, you know, is it a more powerful message? Like, we all have to kind of accept the fact that we're going to win some and lose some. So in terms of making the institution stronger, is it a better message to say, you know, I didn't vote for that one, but you know what? We had a good council discussion. We had a lot of different points of view as a council. I fought like heck from my point of view. But you know what? Council decided to go a different direction, and I support the voice of council, or the decision that was reached by council. Definitely has a liability context that's, in my world, has risen to a couple of actual claims that I've seen over the last couple of years. Give you an example, I had a 4-3 vote. Sorry, Mayor, and it wasn't this community. The mayor was on the 3 side of the 4-3 vote. It was approval of a final development plan. And afterwards, the mayor went over to the building department and said, by the power vested in me as mayor, I'm directing you not to issue building permits for that project. Good idea? No, I mean, he didn't have to be the main cheerleader of the decision, but we were scrambling for where's the ordinance that says the mayor can do, right? Or more nuanced. What if you have and we had this actual situation, it was a 4-3 vote, and the governing body, it was on a land use project. They finally got to yes on a 4-3 vote by adding a condition that said they would get a secondary access across the neighbor's property. So now the fire people are satisfied, and okay, that transportation issue is resolved. And the neighbor was even there and said, hey, I'll negotiate in good faith for the easement. But the person who didn't like the project to begin with, who was on the 3 side of the 4-3 vote, after that vote was cast a couple of days later, went to the neighbor and did what? Tried to convince him not to grant the easement. Good idea?
No.
You know, we always struggle with this issue, but isn't that my right? Yeah, I'm an elected official, but as an individual citizen, can't I go do those things?
Not really.
That hat is never off.
Yeah.
That hat is never off, right? We were worried about a potential claim of tortious interference with prospective business advantage, which is a very legalistic way of saying interfering with someone's business opportunity. Because you can't divorce yourself from that decision of a body that you're a member of that easily, right? So that's about it. I'll just leave the rest of them there, right? Other than say, second to last bullet, you know, make sure that, individually we might want to ask or require more of staff, but we probably have norms and practices around that issue, right? Make sure we're in sync with how we do those kinds of things, okay? Oh, I do want to mention the last one real quick. Do you agree with this notion, like in this day and age, everybody wants to know tomorrow's news yesterday? Yeah, so sometimes, right, just be attuned to that issue. It's a little bit above my pay grade kind of issue, but you know, even when you have your radar on and somebody says, hey, when's council going to do something about this? And you say, well, I don't know, because we haven't had a chance as a group of 7 to get in a room and talk about it yet. And the citizen says, well, okay, that's fine, but what's your personal opinion? All right? Yeah, okay, I'll bite. But please, this is only my personal opinion. This is my personal opinion. This is my, what are they filtering? Council member, council member, council member. So be, protective of each other and of your policymaking process by, exercising that, having the radar go off in those situations, right? So the way it presents itself in my world is people want to know if there's some statute or legal rule, because the way they'll say it is like co-equals on a council. One of them will call me and say, well, I'm frustrated because we were going to have this policy debate as a council on this issue. And I thought our first discussion was going to be at this meeting next week. But we've got 1 or 2 of our members who are out there talking about it in the community. And now I feel like I'm coming to the debate with 1 foot in a bucket because the stage has already been set by people who are purportedly getting ahead of or purporting to speak for council before the council has yet had the opportunity to speak. I view that as a game, you know, you throw the bat and you try to get your hand on the top of the bat before anybody, right? So again, it may not create liability risk other than people want me to help them draft rules that can remove other people from office for these kinds of things. And I always say, well, isn't that just a norm of conduct issue that we ought to commit, you know, to understanding that we're co-equals? We all have an equal say in this issue. Let's try and avoid issues that drive things towards legal problems. Okay.
Isn't that ex parte communication? If
Yes,
we
we're
are-
gonna
Yeah?
get to that one.
Okay.
Yep, all right. Next slide, let's talk about ethics real quick. We do a separate training on ethics. Ethics scandals are exciting to read about when they don't involve the city of Salida, right? Or any municipality from my point of view. So more practically, just recognize, particularly for the newer folks, when you take office, you become subject to Colorado's state code of ethics, right? And it's a state statute. It seems like it's in a faraway place. And it's in a lot of legalese, because it is. But you want to get a good summary and a copy of the statutes and plow through it so that you're prepared to spot and deal with ethical issues before they become big problems. That's your best defense. Because ethics violations are that one area where truly it is a personal liability for which there's no insurance coverage, right? So make sure you have a good understanding of what the rules say and expect of you so that you're prepared to spot and deal with issues. Obviously, the main one is a conflict of interest, where we all intuitively know whenever council is going to take some action that affects my own personal financial interest, I'm in a conflict of interest situation, right? So let's say you're the liquor licensing board. Council's going to vote on a new liquor license. You happen to be the 50% owner of the business and wants to open that new establishment. It's now on the council agenda. What do I have to do?
You have to recuse yourself.
Recuse, before that agenda item comes, or when it comes up, Mayor, I need to make an announcement. I have a conflict of interest. I'm going to recuse myself from the discussion and vote, and do you leave the room? Your local rules require it, I think, right? Curiously, state statute is silent on that issue, but I think your local rules say, leave the room, right? When you make your disclosure, that example that I just gave, was that a good disclosure? I said, hey, Mayor, I'm going to recuse myself because I have a conflict of interest? Is that good enough?
Is it in our,
Yeah.
is it in our policies to leave the room? Because we haven't practiced that.
Yeah.
Mayor Shore
Shore
did,
has. I
but-
don't know that we've had, I guess Councilmember Stevens is the only one who's recused himself from.
I mean, I
I've
have
recused
during,
myself.
during.
Is it in
like,
this, or was
Flour
it?
Mill.
I didn't
Voting.
either.
During
Yeah.
all the short-term rental discussions when I was a lodger, I just kind of sat quietly and didn't make faces.
I mean, that's the thing,
Like
right?
signal
that-
any kind of
Yeah.
disapproval.
I guess
or-
just like, I don't know. I just want to make sure we're like doing it the right way moving forward. If we are supposed to leave the room, like I'm happy to do that if,
Sure,
if
I'll
we're
confirm
required
with
to, but.
Nina,
Yeah.
we have that.
Take a look at that. Nina and Jeff and your city administrator can help with the answer question. From a risk management perspective, I like it because of the last prong of the rule. It says, do not attempt to influence the other members. So in my scenario, what if you do everything right and then you decide to stay and watch the hearing and then somebody at the dais says, well, I have some questions for the applicant. And what if it's the person who held the conflict says, well, I can answer those questions for you. Maybe you can get away with that by, maybe it's a softball question. Hey, how big's the new establishment? Well, that's objective information. Oh, it's going to be, 2,500 square feet. Oh, and by the way, you're going to love it. We're going to have a great menu and there's plenty of parking and that sounds like influence. So I mention that because I want you to be protected individually. And so sometimes I think that might lead us to the point of saying, wouldn't it be better if I had somebody else do my speaking for me? Whether it was for sport or genuine disagreement or what have you, I have seen people file ethics complaints based on violation of that influence provision, irrespective of anything else. Okay. One of the nice things you have is a resource, and I'm not sure which of the two it is, whether it was the orientation document or your handbook, but so much about what lawyers say is don't do this, right? But in your handbook, you got a nice explanation of the conflict of interest rule that talks about things that aren't a conflict, like if it's the common interest of the community, that kind of thing. It's got some examples that remind us, hey, these are the things that are permissible. And so you can let those, run through your mind in addition to the don't do's that I mentioned. Okay. Confidential information we've touched on, there's a rule against that. Gifts, interestingly in Colorado, do you all get a monthly salary for being on council? The mayor gets a little bit more.
Yep.
Yeah, so it's not the lavish salary.
And health
It's just a public
insurance.
service.
So,
Nor is it the gifts, right? The important thing to remember is we actually have a constitutional amendment in Colorado on gifts to elected officials. It's multiple pages in our Constitution, and it's also multiple pages in the statute. But here's how I boil it down into 2 sentences. Don't accept any gift in any one year from any one person of more than $75 if it's in any way related to your status as a public official. Okay?
$74 gift, oh boy.
Yeah, well, subject to this big caveat, right? Don't accept a gift no matter what its value if it's obvious to a reasonable person that the gift is being offered to influence your vote as a public official, to reward you for some vote that you've cast, or to attempt to influence you to stray from the fair and impartial discharge of your duties as an elected official. That's a lot of legalese. Most practically, right, if the gift doesn't look right and feel right in the context and timing, then don't accept it, and you'll be in a good spot, right? And it's there are a lot of exceptions, and you can read the statute and take a look at those, and your attorneys probably have a good summary of this. But so much of it is timing and context, and we all got friends and colleagues in the community, and probably personal friendship relationships with people who do business with the city, and that's all fine. We may have had Thanksgiving dinner with them, right? But if next week is the week that person has their, new liquor license on the agenda, then probably this week is not the week to be accepting tickets to the Colorado Rockies game, if they were ever worth $75, right? Well, it doesn't matter, because in the appearance is that, right? Perhaps I'm being given this unusual gift at this particular point in time because of what's coming up on the agenda, right? So, all
I'm not
right.
going to a Rockies game as much of a gift these days, but
It's a burden. It's an undue burden.
watch our boys lose.
hot dogs.
All right,
Watch our boys lose.
lastly on ethics, do you agree with this notion? Like, you can do everything appropriately under the rules, but there still might be an appearance. And do you agree with this notion, no matter what we think of it, fair or unfair in matters of ethics, sometimes it's simply the case that perception equals reality and reality equals perception, right? So whatever that looks like in your own individual calculus of thinking, I would encourage you to think about the appearance of impropriety. Your handbook, chapter 5 of your handbook, actually helps you analyze that issue, because it does offer a definition of what a appearance of impropriety is, right? If it's a situation that will create a reasonable perception that your ability to carry out your official duties with integrity, impartiality, or competency is impaired, then you ought to consider that as an appearance of impropriety, right? So now, running the other direction, what if you have a situation, I'll use my liquor example. What if no one has any conflict, but for some reason there's this buzz or gossip out in the community, and you get to the liquor hearing and there's somebody sitting out here in the audience and going, why is she up there? I thought she had a conflict. She can't vote on this, right? That might be an opportunity to use what I call a curative disclosure, and don't underestimate the power of this. You can say, Mayor, look, before you start the hearing, I just want to clear the air on something. I've heard in the community there's some gossip or suggestion that I should not be sitting in judgment of this liquor application because I have a conflict of interest. I just want to assure everyone that I consulted with the administrator and the attorney. I understand what our code of ethics provides, and I actually do not have any direct financial interest. I don't have any other personal relationship in this matter. Yes, I do know the applicant, but only in passing, and I have no personal relationship with them, or whatever you say, right? And then say, it's got to be true, but it shores up trust and confidence to also remind people that, hey, in addition to not having that conflict, right, I intend to review this application the same as I would any other application, and I understand what my responsibility is as an elected official sitting in judgment of this application, right? We'd love it from a risk management perspective to have that on the record, Because if someone disagrees, well, this is their time, they better stand up and say, Mayor, I disagree. I think she's got a conflict. And then the mayor can involve the administrator and attorney and say, okay, well, what's the evidence? What's the evidence? And, well, you have a conflict of interest because you live in this town. Like the water rates. Do you get a vote on the water rates? There's a burden. There's a burden because they never go down, right? And sometimes, you can't vote on the water rates because you have a water account and you pay the water bill. So your vote is just in view of your own interest. What's that? Why is that not a conflict of interest? Because that's an interest that's held by a large group of that's the same public good or same public detriment interest as everyone who's similarly situated. Okay. That's it on ethics unless anyone has any questions.
And I would like to, Sam was right. It does say in your handbook that if you are recusing yourself from a vote, you have to leave the room.
Oh.
So we'll remember that for next time.
Good to know.
It is awkward just to kind of sit there and be like, just cover your face.
Right. Yeah. From my perspective, I'm not worried about, the person with the conflict going back here and going, yeah, good comment, bad comment. But it's again, for sport or whatever reason, I've seen people, they'd say something, and then somebody, for whatever reason, thought they were running afoul of the influence rule. So if you do have an interest, it sounds unfair, because this is where constitutional principles seem to butt up against these requirements for elected officials, because you say, look, I ran for office, but I'm not, I can still own property and deal with my own business affairs, right? But hey, only 7 people get to be elected officials too, and this is the tension between those two. So yes, it might be a burden, yes, it might cost more time and money, but in terms of protecting yourself from that individual risk under the ethics laws, that's where I encourage you to get somebody else to do your speaking for you, right? A business partner or somebody else who's gonna represent your interest. Okay,
I have a question.
yes.
Can you, if somebody recuses themselves, can you challenge that to try to force them to vote?
Why don't,
So ask Nina and Jeff, and staff can help look at that issue as well. But under the state code of ethics, you do not have under the state code of ethics what some of our home rule members have, just a handful or 2 of them. Some of our codes of ethics from some of our home rule members, they have a provision that says the remaining members of the governing body may vote to decide whether a fellow member has a conflict that requires recusal. And then if council votes, 6-0 that you have a conflict, then you're obligated to step off to comply with the local rule, okay? Now, in the absence of a rule, again, talk with Jeff and Nina for their thoughts if you want to explore this issue, but here's my 2 cents. If you don't have a rule, don't do it, because then it looks like we're being what? Arbitrary. And we're making it up as we go, right? And so if you want to get into that game, and if you want, I'll stick my neck out here. My own personal preference is I'm not a big fan of such a rule because I fear of its weaponization in difficult situations. So, and I think that in my 35 years of doing this, if it was apparent to the other 6 that the person ought not to be there, it's we sort of looked at those issues in the moment when they were unfolding on the dais, and almost all of them were handled by, let's take a little recess and may I go talk to this member, and whether it's the administrator or the attorney, remind that member, hey, you're really getting out on thin ice here. You ought to recuse yourself. Now, 1 out of 1,000, the person says, I hear you and I don't care. I'm going to do what I'm going to do. And it's okay. So under the state code of ethics, it's we individually own the right to make the choice, and we individually own the consequences. Yeah.
I would counter that recusing yourself can also be used as a weapon itself as well,
Yeah.
just to avoid uncomfortable situations or voting.
That's a different rule than the one of members voting someone off for a conflict. And so if that's again, talk with your staff, and I don't even know if you have something on the books, but some people address that issue by having a rule that says you cannot recuse yourself from a vote unless you're legally obligated to recuse yourself. And then other people get at it with voting rules that that's why I went to law school and not a math person, because depending on the rules, right, it can influence the math on the voting. But there are other ways of getting at that issue if that's actually a concern. Yeah, that's been, yeah, it's tough. Particularly in this day and age, you know, it can be tough to cast a tough vote, you know? Yeah, it can feel like you're gonna be under attack, right? So, but that's something I've seen in rules addressed as well. All right, let's talk about my last substantive topic, and then we'll wrap things up. All right, did that answer your question?
Yeah, my question was, I guess that, can we do that? And the answer is, does it exist? And so I'll just ask Christy.
I'm looking and it doesn't seem like, it seems like if someone has decided that they have a conflict, that they have that right to say they do and to leave. It doesn't really have anything in here that allows for the rest of the council to question that decision.
Yeah, just to make sure we're looking at the same, I view that as the flip side of the question that you raised about, can we by rule require that a person cast a vote except in situations when they in fact have a conflict, right? It's kind of two sides of the same coin.
Is it ever recommended that, I know you already brought this up a little bit, but for a council member to say why out loud they have a conflict instead of, or is it simply a matter of, I feel I have a conflict and am recusing myself from this vote and they're leaving? Like, would it make sense for us to require them to state what the conflict is so that it's clearer?
Number 2 says disclose the conflict.
Yeah.
Is the
I'm a
first
big-
bulleted point.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the idea of disclosing the nature of the conflict, right? I'm sorry, because I started down this road and I didn't speak to the rest of it. When I asked, you know, you just say, Mayor, I have a conflict of interest, I'm going to recuse myself. Was that sufficient under state law? Arguably, yes. But what happens when you say I have a conflict of interest, you get up and you leave the room? What's going on back in the room? Right, everybody else is like their hair's on fire going, what's the conflict? Oh my gosh, they must be so corrupt. You know? I think that's the time, right, to show and build faith and trust by telling everybody, hey, Mayor, I'm going to recuse myself because I have a conflict of interest because I happen to be a 50% owner of the limited liability company that is requesting this application, right? And that shows everybody that I know what the rules are, that I'm being transparent about my conflict, right? And it helps make a record, right? That the recusal is for the appropriate reason. So I don't want to go beyond that and start getting into hypotheticals about, you know, the situation of.
Nina's giving her legal workshop on January 20th, so write down questions
Save the date.
that you want to talk about. And I'm making notes in our handbook.
Put that on the shelf for Nina.
She'll be able to.
All right, last substantive topic. Being a local government official in Colorado is just so interesting because you deal with so many different subject areas, right? And all good things happen locally. You have an impact, right? Now, one of the unique things about Colorado that we cherish and appreciate is the fact that under tradition and law, right, we have the power at the local level to make certain decisions around topics like land use and licensing, right? It's this city council that gets to decide whether someone, or the planning commission, right, that gets to decide whether someone is allowed to rezone their property or subdivide their property or get a liquor license, right? And we want that power. We don't want the county making those decisions or the state. We learned that when Governor Polis, right, 2 years ago, tried to introduce legislation that took away some of your land use authority. We want that authority. But the important point is to recognize that when we're making decisions that affect people's individual protected property rights in their own property or in their expectation of a license, right, that we're bound by constitutional law to make sure we're honoring their due process rights, okay? So the grand bargain is we get the power to decide, but we have to make sure we're honoring their due process rights, okay? Now, the odd thing is the due process rules of engagement require us to individually, right, conduct ourselves a lot differently than we do when we're in policymaking mode. Like when we're in policymaking mode, if we're gonna have a debate about whether or not we're gonna regulate short-term rentals at all, you know, we can lobby and be lobbied as long as we're complying with the open meetings law. We can do our own research. We can vote yes or no because we love or hate short-term rentals, right? But when we're making decisions affecting people's property rights, all those ways of approaching decision-making have to be set aside in favor of conducting ourselves more like judges do. Because these decisions, the process is called a quasi-judicial decision, where you're acting not as legislators, policymakers, but as judges, right? Sitting in judgment of a specific application by a specific applicant in front of us. Sounds really counterintuitive, right? Right? But the simple way to bring it all back home is to remember from where it comes, right? And that is, we're bound as the governmental decision makers who have this power, right, to follow the federal and state constitutional provisions that say no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, right? Okay, so let's go to the next slide. And there's more, I skipped over, one of the handouts is the state ethics code is like 15 or 20 pages, single-spaced. So I just did a one-page handout, so please, I hope it's helpful, but it's just a one-page handout on state ethics code. The last one is a handout about quasi-judicial decision-making. A quasi-judicial process is this. You have a public hearing, right, where you as the judges have to make the decision based on the information presented to you at the hearing, and the decision has to be made upon pre-existing legal standards that guide the decision. And the decision has to be made by a fair and impartial decision maker. That's you, okay? So here are some of the big risk issues. Just like a judge presiding over a case, right, in a court action, as the quasi-judge is sitting in judgment of like a marijuana license or a liquor license or a rezoning application, you can't, under these constitutional principles, engage with the applicant or opponents or proponents outside of the public hearing. Why is that? Because
Say hi?
well, you can say hi. Yeah. You can't engage with them about the matters to be decided in the hearing, right?
Yeah, it's because when you come in here, then you don't have the ability to see both sides as much if you've been maybe hearing more from one side of the argument.
Yeah, and as a property owner, I have a constitutional right that if you're going to make a decision regarding my property, right, then anybody who wants to speak for it or against it, I have the constitutional right to hear their evidence, right, in the hearing setting, right? The analogy is just like this. Let's say you and I are in a court proceeding. I owe you some money. You get tired of waiting around for me to pay. Tomorrow is our trial, right? Your expectation from a due process standpoint is that I'm not calling up the district court judge the night before saying, hey, judge, how's it looking? You know, you're going to rule for me tomorrow, right? Same thing for your applicants and everybody else, every interested party. Everybody gets to hear everybody's information all at the same time at the city council public hearing. Very important aspect of that. If we have a proceeding that's loaded up with ex parte communications where, you know, you're having one-on-one meetings with the applicant, or you're meeting with the HOA and the neighbors talking about how to oppose this application, that's not judge-like behavior. That is inappropriate ex parte communications outside of the hearing, right? And that's a clear path to having your decision challenged if we have a proceeding that's loaded up with that, okay? The other is, as a judge, we have to be impartial, right? And we have to make sure we're not making up our mind before the hearing. You know, what if you've got another application for a new liquor license for a new, brew pub? And I just happened to, the newspaper reporter calls me up and said, we got enough brew pubs in Salida. I will never vote in favor of another brew pub license. Does that sound like a fair?
No.
No. Right, so we have to hold our powder. It sounds unfair. Look at the bright side, there's 7 of you. In our community of 6,000 people, only 7 people get to decide, right? So we have to remain impartial, make sure we don't make any prejudicial pre-hearing statements, okay? Make sure we handle conflicts of interest properly. And then here's probably the most important piece of a quasi-judicial process, is your council deliberations, right? Your decision as the council has to be based upon existing standards, existing legal standards that are available to the applicant and every other interested party, so everybody knows what the rules of the game are, right? So when you have your deliberations, you need to focus on those standards and criteria. So I'll give you an example using liquor licensing. Maybe we have an application for a new liquor license, good hearing, everybody puts in their information. Mayor brings it back and says, all right, let's decide, council, who wants to start? I say, Mayor, I'll start. I'm gonna vote no because I don't drink. That's my own personal bias, right? Is that a legally permissible reason to vote against a liquor license? No, right? There are plenty of legal standards, but that's not one of them, right? And our Supreme Court has said so, right? The standards are more nuanced. They're things like, and they're already on the books, and they're already in the staff report. You know, is the liquor license premises at least 500 feet from a school? Is the applicant of good moral character? What does that mean? Staff, what does that mean? If you want to ask during the hearing, what does that mean? And there'll probably be something in the staff report about that, right? It means like, you know, it means, you know, they don't have a lot of convictions and criminal history that, you know, makes them an unacceptable person to hold a liquor license. So we got to focus on those criteria. Now, it could be a little more nuanced. Do you all decide development proposals? Once in a while, I think you probably decide of like a special use or conditional use. We call it something like that. Those are a little more nuanced. What if you have a special use and it's the, you know, special use for some, well, I don't know if apartments are a special review use, but let's pretend they are. It's a special review use application that has to come in front of city council. And you say, have a nice hearing and you say, Mayor, you know, I'm going to vote no against this project because I don't like it. It's not the best start, but we'll get there just by using what I call Sam's rule of why.
I like
As the decision makers, just have a discussion. So somebody else says, okay, Councilmember Sam, why don't you like it? Well, I don't like it because the applicant didn't contribute to the Christmas drive. No, staff's going to jump in and say that's an irrelevant, right, criteria. That's not part of the code. That's not part of the standard. So maybe Sam's got his head on straight and he says, I'm going to vote no because I don't like it because it doesn't meet our standards. Now we're getting somewhere, right? Are we done? He says, well, Sam, why doesn't it meet our standards? I'm going to vote no because I don't like it because it doesn't meet our standards. Because in our land use code, it says in order to approve a special review use, the use has to be compatible with the neighborhood. That's a fuzzy one, right? Are we done? No. Why isn't it compatible with the neighborhood would be the next question, right? And then Sam says, well, because according to the staff report, compatibility depends upon architectural features and type of uses, and this is the apartment, the one and only apartment building that's going to be plopped down in a 6-block area of purely single-family residential, right? And not only that, they're proposing that this be some exotic, crazy-looking building that doesn't look anything like residential. And so for those reasons, you know, but you can see what we've done by using the rule of why. As the decision makers, we have naturally gotten to a granular discussion focused on the existing legal standards, right? That's going to help us make a defensible decision. And staff's there to support you, right? What if the criteria can be hard to wrap your arms around? If you're having trouble with the criteria, it's always your prerogative to just ask staff, how does this criteria work? Not to pick on the planners, but the one I use is, you know, what if it's...
Pick on him.
What if building height is the entire issue? You know, and the staff testified that, hey, they don't meet our height standard, and then the applicant testified, yeah, it does meet our height standard, right? And you're having this, well, I'm gonna vote no because I don't like it because it doesn't meet our height standard, right? But we got conflicting testimony. And it's all about, well, how do we interpret the height standard? Well, that's when we call the planning department and say, hey, could you remind us again, what's our standard on height? And how do we measure height? And by the way, why does it take 3 pages of code book to tell us how we measure the height standard, right? But that's what you want to do. You got to get real granular. It's nice to have a planning commission. What's that?
Not all land is flat.
Particularly here. Yeah, when I was in a former life, I represented communities like Marble and Gunnison and a bunch of West Slope mountain towns, and people would show up with the absolute certainty they were entitled to a building permit for some lot that was 60-degree slope. And I said, well, no, we're just going to make a record here, and you'll understand why the Board of Trustees is disapproving your special review use request. But you see the exercise we have to go through. From where you sit, use the staff report as your tool to help you see what the criteria are and have that discussion with each other about how you're applying the criteria. And that's how you get to a defensible decision, right? So,
Get to use that all the time.
yeah. All right, again, we do separate trainings on that. We're happy to come back and do that, more on that for you and or the commission or both, whatever you prefer. So those are my big ticket risks on quasi-judicial decision-making. Any questions on that stuff? All right, be prepared if somebody runs in the supermarket, says, can I talk to you about that, marijuana license? It's coming up next week. Whatever it looks like to you as an ambassador, just tell me, it's not that we don't want to hear from you, we'd love to hear from you. And as the decision maker, I got to make sure everybody gets a fair process. So if you can come to the hearing, come to the hearing. If you can't come to the hearing, email whatever comments you have about the application to the clerk, and they'll make sure that those comments get in front of us as the council members. And we'll read them. Yeah. Now, last thing on that is what if somebody sends you an email at home with all the reasons you ought to vote no on that application? What do you need to do with that?
You mean on your personal email you're
Well,
saying?
any email. It's just from Citizen Sam to you. Dear council member, vote no on Joe's marijuana dispensary. And a long email with all the reasons you ought to vote no. What do you want to do with that?
Send it to Nina.
Disclose.
Well, I feel like
Yeah.
I don't know, typically we send it, like any emails that we've all received in favor of or against any issue that comes up, we all typically just send it to Christy to send out to everyone so that everyone sees the same concerns or support.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yep, that's right.
Great.
Yeah,
Great, because that's what we've been doing, so.
the way we cure this problem is to get that information on the record. It's not that the information itself is always verbatim, but it is unless we get it on the record, and then anybody who has a problem with it can test it, respond to it. Yeah. Don't worry about those weird one-off situations where the citizen combines their comments on the marijuana application with some highly sensitive email about some personal situation. You're like, oh my God, now what do I do? Please, citizens, don't do that to us. But if that happens, staff will take that and they'll, right? And they will, or if it's super, super sensitive, call staff and say, I got the most bizarre email, On one hand, they were talking about this application, but then they were talking about whatever, their health and their divorce and this. And this.
We don't get
It's
those.
super sensitive stuff.
Real
Staff
real
can
quick,
help you.
Sam, just, 9
know.
o'clock, or do we have to
I'm done.
have
Okay.
a special extension?
I don't think so. We have a policy that says
Just
we
a
have
work
to end by
session.
9 unless they motion for it.
But we don't make motions in
during
work
work sessions.
sessions?
We don't. I think we're okay.
So I think
But,
we're- yeah.
Yeah.
Yep, I've got about 1 minute left, and sorry I've run a little bit long.
Didn't want to jump the gun, I was just
Oh, no problem.
jumping the gun.
No, thank you, my apologies. Yeah, my apologies for running a bit long. Let me
No,
just
that's fine.
wrap up with some concluding thoughts. Next slide. And these are things we've all already touched on, but I just want to highlight a couple of key phrases in terms of risk management stuff. Can we go next?
Here it is.
There it is. Okay. For the new folks in particular, but for everyone, final question for you all, and that is this. Do you like process?
Yes.
Do you like process?
Yeah.
Right? So remember, as elected leaders, right, process is a product that you provide in and of itself. Embrace process irrespective of outcome, right? And that'll serve you well in terms of managing risk. We talked about the transparency rule. Make sure we keep that in mind, right? I mentioned it in context of quasi-judicial decisions, but it's always good to have focused and on-point deliberations. It helps the citizens understand why you're making the decisions that you're making. In the quasi-judicial world, it's a magical tool that helps us make a transcript in defense of your decision. Always look to staff to help you if you need help understanding what the relevant boundaries are to a discussion or appropriate considerations, right? And it's, I think your prerogative individually, you know, I know sometimes from your perspective, it can feel awkward or potential risk embarrassment to float an issue for the first time in a meeting, right? So, you know, maybe your mayor and your administrator are resources in that regard because they help read tea leaves for the entire council, right? So it's never inappropriate to run an idea by them, and particularly new folks, you're wondering what the background's been on an issue. They can help you, right, see where that issue sits in the eyes of the group. Individually and collectively, make sure you're staying within the scope of your authority, your scope of employment, right? Recognize that your authority is exercised collectively. Be careful of that temptation where some folks, you know, there can be a lot of community pressure to pull you into areas where you actually don't have authority to act. Yeah. So not to be too glib about it, but we're approaching 9 o'clock, but you have to be careful of that because they're not the ones that are going to defend you, right? They'll appreciate it if you attempt to do something on their behalf, but if you had no authority to do it and you're legally challenged, then it'll just serve to the ultimate frustration of everyone, right? With a lot of resources consumed in between, right? So lastly, you know, just recognize those fiduciary stewardship and we responsibilities, right, of being on a multi-member governing body, and that'll help you with success individually, collectively, and help you manage your risk appropriately. So with that, thanks for the opportunity to present, Mayor, Council. I'm sorry I ran long. There's a couple
No,
of
you
more.
didn't. I mean, we're still before 9, so we're good.
There's a couple more resources there for you all, including I put at your places a copy of our elected officials handbook, which speaks to some risk issues at the governing body level, and then there's a slide with some more information about our source of coverages. So I'll open it up to any other questions. Yeah, the thoughts?
How did you make Sursa so entertaining for the last 2 hours? Thank you so much.
We live for this.
I'll let Tammy know how entertaining you were, Sam.
No, but
Thank you all so much.
Smiling.
Yeah.
Like, that was genuine. Like,
That was good.
That was good. Thank you so much.
If we didn't find this good, then we just, it's going to be a long couple of years for us.
Some unearned confidence in that matter.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's precious.
Okay, cool.